Hey there, story lovers. This is N.O. Harry, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if McGonagall's cat form sensed Harry's Animagus core and trained him to transform at age 10? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1, The Cat on the Wall. The tabby cat had been sitting on the garden wall of number 4, Privet Drive for the better part of an hour, and in that time, 3 things had happened that were entirely unremarkable and 1 thing that had stopped her cold. The unremarkable things: a postman had walked past without looking up, a dog across the street had barked twice at nothing, and the woman inside the house, large, horse-faced, neck craned like she was perpetually trying to see over a fence, had twitched the curtains 4 times in the last 20 minutes. Petunia Dursley was suspicious by constitution. The cat had learned to ignore her. The remarkable thing was the boy. He was sitting on the front step, which itself was unusual. He was normally kept inside or in the back garden where the neighbors couldn't see him and ask inconvenient questions. He was small for 10, with knobbly knees and elbows and a pair of glasses that were held together at the bridge with a strip of sellotape. His hair was the particular variety of untamable that suggested it had never once in its life obeyed a brush. He was shelling peas into a bowl that was clearly too large for his lap, and he was doing it with the precise, mechanical focus of someone who had learned that doing the job perfectly was the best way to avoid notice. None of that was what had stopped her. What had stopped her was the feeling. Minerva McGonagall had been an Animagus for 43 years. She had completed her transformation at the age of 17 in a broom cupboard at Hogwarts while her roommate slept 6 feet away, and the moment she had first settled into her cat form, she had felt it, that deep, resonant hum in the base of her sternum, like a second heartbeat, older and more certain than the first. Every Animagus she had ever met described it differently. Alastair Moody called it his anchor. James Potter, insufferably, had called it his cool bit. The boy on the step had that hum. Not a faint echo of it. Not a suggestion. The thing was radiating off him like heat off summer tarmac, strong enough that her cat form had gone rigid the moment she'd caught it on the breeze, strong enough that she had briefly, absurdly, looked around for another Animagus crouched in the petunias. There was no one in the petunias. There was only Harry Potter, shelling peas, humming something tuneless under his breath, entirely unaware that his magic was singing. She sat very still and watched him for a long time. The last time she had felt that particular quality of magical resonance had been in 1978, sitting across a desk from a 17-year-old James Potter who had just successfully completed his Animagus transformation and couldn't stop grinning about it. The resonance in James had been triumphant, fully realized, a thing that had finished becoming what it was. The resonance in the boy on the step was raw and young and entirely uncontrolled, the way a river sounds before it finds its banks. It was the most powerful untrained Animagus core she had felt in her life. The bowl of peas slipped. Harry grabbed it one-handed without looking, the way you grab something you've been trained by experience to expect will fall, and went back to shelling. Minerva made a decision. She had made decisions sitting on this wall before. The last significant one had been 9 years ago, when she had sat here all day watching the Dursleys and said nothing, done nothing, let Dumbledore leave the boy on the doorstep and walked away into the dark. She had told herself it was the right call. She had told herself it every year since, with decreasing conviction. She wasn't making that mistake again. She jumped off the wall into the garden. Harry's head came up immediately, eyes sharp behind the taped glasses. He went very still, the stillness of a child who has learned that sudden movements attract attention, but his eyes tracked her all the way across the garden path with an alertness that was not afraid. Just watchful. Just calculating, in the way that animals are calculating when they're deciding whether something is prey or predator or neither. She sat down 2 feet from him and looked at him steadily. "You're the cat from Mrs. Figg's," he said. Not a question. His voice was quiet, with the particular flatness of someone who didn't expect to be wrong about things but had learned not to be loud about being right. She blinked at him slowly. "She lets you out sometimes." He looked at the peas, then back at her. "You've been on the wall before. Different days. She had been, in fact, on the wall on 14 separate occasions over the past 3 years. She was mildly impressed he'd noticed. Most adults didn't notice. She blinked at him again, a long, deliberate blink, the kind she never used with actual cats because actual cats never understood that she was doing it on purpose. Something shifted in his face. "That's not a normal cat blink," he said. She kept looking at him. He set the bowl of peas down on the step with exaggerated care, the way you set something down when your hands are doing something your brain hasn't quite approved yet, and stared at her. "Are you a—" he stopped. The word he'd been about to use was hovering visibly in the air between them, and she watched him decide it was too strange, too hopeful, too likely to be wrong. He settled on, "Are you magic?" She transformed. Not gradually, not with any particular drama. One moment there was a tabby cat sitting on the path, and the next moment there was a woman sitting on the path, upright and composed in green robes with her dark hair pinned at the back of her neck, and she was watching Harry Potter's face with the professional attention of someone who has spent decades learning to read students. What she saw was not what she expected. Most children, confronted with a person suddenly appearing where a cat had been, did one of 3 things: screamed, ran, or went blank with shock. Harry did none of these. He went very still for approximately 2 seconds, and then something in his expression, something careful and guarded and layered like paint over old paint, cracked open just slightly, and underneath it she saw something she recognized from a mirror, 40 years ago. "Of course," his face said. "Of course that's real. Of course that's possible. Of course. You're a witch," he said. His voice was completely level. "And you've been watching me." "I have," she said. She kept her voice even, neither apologetic nor defensive. She had learned that children who were accustomed to adults managing them around the truth responded far better to the truth delivered plainly. "My name is Professor Minerva McGonagall. I teach at a school called Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. You will receive a letter inviting you to attend next year, when you turn 11. Harry looked at her for a long moment. "Is Mrs. Fig a witch?" "A squib. She has magical heritage but no magic of her own." "Dumbledore asked her to keep an eye on you." "Dumbledore. The headmaster of Hogwarts. He's also the one who arranged for you to live here." A muscle in Harry's jaw tightened. It was barely visible, but she caught it. "He put me here." "Yes. With them." She did not look away from his eyes. "Yes. He absorbed this." He didn't shout, didn't crumple, didn't perform any of the reactions that an adult trying to comfort a child would have hoped for. He just sat with it, the way you sit with something heavy, getting a sense of its weight. Then he said, "Why are you here now?" "Not the watching. Today." "Why did you come in?" This was, she decided, the moment that would determine everything about the next year of both their lives. "Because," she said carefully, "I have been an Animagus, someone who can transform into an animal, for over 40 years, and when I came over that wall today, I felt something I have not felt in a very long time." She paused. "I felt it coming from you." The garden was very quiet. Somewhere inside the house, a television was murmuring. "What does that mean?" Harry asked. "It means that the ability to become an Animagus is, in most people, something that requires years of study and practice and considerable effort. In rare cases, very rare, a person is born with the instinct already active. Their magic reaches toward transformation the way other people's magic reaches toward, say, flight, or fire." She watched his face. "You have that instinct. It's been there for some time, I suspect." He was quiet. "Then, the dreams," he said, so quietly she almost missed it. "Tell me." He looked at the peas. "I dream about running. Not like running from something, just, running because I can. And the world smells different. Like I can smell where everything's been." He said it like he was confessing to something embarrassing. "And sometimes I wake up and I've moved in the night." Into the corner of the cupboard. He stopped. The cupboard? That's where I sleep, he said, in the tone of someone closing a door. Minerva kept her face still with considerable effort. I see, she said. They looked at each other. What were you going to do about it? Harry asked. You said you came in because of the instinct. So what were you going to do, tell me and go away again? No, she said. I was going to ask if you wanted to learn. The television inside said something about a car chase. The peas sat in their bowl. Harry looked at his hands, then at the spot on the path where the cat had been, then back at her. They can't know, he said, meaning the Dursleys. They won't. Anne, he stopped again. She waited. This isn't the school thing. This is separate. You teach me now. Before Hogwarts. Yes. Why? She considered the question, because it deserved consideration. Because what you have is rare, and wild, and currently unsupervised, and if left unattended it will either resolve itself into something you can't control, or suppress itself entirely and leave you less than you should be. She paused. And because I should have come off that wall 9 years ago and I didn't, and I would like to do something useful now. It was more honesty than she had planned to offer. But something in the boy demanded it, or rather, something in her demanded it when she was looking at him. He was the kind of child who could smell evasion the way his dreams told him he could smell trails. Harry was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, when do we start? They started the next morning at 5:30, which was Harry's idea. Aunt Petunia gets up at 6, he said, appearing at the end of the garden in a too large T-shirt with Dudley's second best printed on the collar in marker that hadn't quite washed out. He was carrying a library book about mammals of the British Isles. I thought you might want to start with theory. Minerva, who had cleared the plan with no one, certainly not Dumbledore, and she was not thinking about that, not yet, looked at the book and felt something that was not quite amusement but was adjacent to it. Where did you get that? Mrs. Figg's. She's got loads. He held it up. I thought if I'm going to turn into an animal, I should probably know about animals. That is, she said, after a moment, actually an entirely reasonable instinct. Is that surprising? Sit down, Mr. Potter. He sat, cross-legged on the damp grass, and looked at her with those sharp eyes, and she thought, this is going to be interesting. She sat across from him, which felt slightly absurd given the setting, a suburban back garden at 5:30 in the morning, dew still on the lawn, a gnome ornament leering at them from beside the shed, and folded her hands and began. Animagus transformation is one of the most demanding branches of magic in existence, she said. It is not taught at Hogwarts. Most professional wizards never attempt it. Of those who do, perhaps 1 in 20 succeeds, and the process typically takes between 2 and 5 years even for talented adult wizards. She looked at him. The reason you are not in that category is that your core, the center of your magical instinct, is already oriented toward transformation. This means we are not teaching you something foreign. We are teaching you to recognize something that is already part of you. Harry was listening in the way she had already started to identify as his particular listening mode, completely still, absorbing everything, with a small vertical line between his eyebrows that meant he was also turning it over, checking it against something. What does my core feel like? He asked. From the outside. Wild, she said, without hesitating. Kinetic. Like something that wants to move. She paused. Your father had it. He was one of 3 students who achieved Animagus transformation while still at school, which is essentially unheard of. The line between his eyebrows deepened. My dad was an Animagus. She had not planned to mention James yet. But the question was direct and the boy was looking at her, and she had already decided that evasion was not the currency she would spend with him. He was. His form was a stag. Harry said nothing. He looked at the library book in his lap, at the cover, a red deer stag photographed in morning mist, antlers spread like branches. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he put the book down on the grass and said, "What do I do first?" The first exercise was not, as Harry clearly expected, anything involving transformation. It was breathing. "You're annoyed," Minerva said, watching him sit with the patience of someone who had spent 30 years watching students think they were hiding their feelings. "I'm not." "You are. You thought I'd have you turning into something by Friday." He looked sideways at her. "Maybe. What you are going to do instead is learn to hear your core. Animagus magic is not cast. It is recognized. The transformation doesn't come from your hands or your wand, it comes from somewhere below all of that, something older than spellwork." She leaned forward slightly. "Every living thing has a thread of that older magic. In Animagi, that thread is thick enough to grab. But first you have to learn where it is." He listened to this with the same focused stillness. "Then, how?" "You breathe, and you listen. That's all. I want you to close your eyes and breathe deeply and tell me what you feel." "That sounds like something from a wellness program." "Mr. Potter." "Closing my eyes," he said, and did. She watched him. The garden was beginning to lighten, birds starting up in the hedges, the sky going from navy to blue-gray. He sat with his back straight, which she noted. He hadn't been told to sit straight, he'd just done it, the way someone does when they've made a decision to take something seriously. For 2 minutes there was silence. Then he said, quietly, "It's in my chest." "Like, when you said it radiates, I thought you meant outward, but it's not, it goes downward. Like something rooted." She kept very still. "And it's warm," he said. "Not like heat, more like," he stopped. "Like when you've been running for a long time and everything feels better. Like that." "Good," she said, and meant it completely. "That is your core. That is what we're working with." He opened his eyes. "That was actually kind of brilliant," he said, with the slightly reluctant honesty of someone not used to being impressed by things. "Don't tell anyone," she said. "I have a reputation." He almost smiled. It was the first time she'd seen anything close to it. The routine built itself over the following 2 weeks with the organic efficiency of something that had been waiting to exist. 5:30 every morning, back garden or the park 3 streets over when it rained and Petunia's window faced the wrong way. Minerva brought books from the Hogwarts library under a Notice Me Not charm, which she transferred to a worn backpack she'd purchased from a charity shop with Muggle coins she kept in a small pouch for exactly these occasions. Harry read everything. Not quickly, not the way students read when they're looking for the answer to a specific question, but thoroughly, in the way of someone who has spent years making a friend of whatever books he could get his hands on. He never complained about the theoretical work, which she had expected to be a battle. He did occasionally challenge it. "This says Animagus forms are fixed," he said on the 5th day, holding up a slim volume on magical transformations. "That you get one form and it doesn't change. But some of what I dream about is different. Sometimes it's heavier. Sometimes it's faster. Could that be 2 forms?" "No," she said. "Though the question is a good one. Dreams about transformation are often imprecise, the subconscious doesn't distinguish between forms the way the core does. What you're likely experiencing is your form at different ages, different states. An Animagus form grows with you. A stag at 10 looks different than a stag at 30. She paused. "When you said heavier, what else?" He thought about it. "Low. Close to the ground. And the smell thing is stronger." "Interesting. What does that mean?" "It means I may have been premature in assuming your form." He looked at the book. Then at her. "You thought you knew what it was." "I had a hypothesis. But maybe it's not a stag." "Perhaps," she said, and the word felt like a door left open, which she suspected he would spend the next week walking back and forth through. He did. She could tell by the way he moved through the exercises over the following days, more intent, more interior, like he was listening harder. His control over reaching the core improved dramatically. By the end of the second week, he could find it in under 30 seconds, could feel the edges of it, could describe what she now thought of as its texture with an accuracy that would have been impressive in a third-year student. Petunia Dursley, during this same period, began giving Harry looks at breakfast that were different from her usual varieties. The usual looks ranged from suspicious, "You're planning something," to contemptuous, "You're a freak and we all know it," to carefully neutral, "There are guests and you will behave." The new look was something she couldn't place immediately, and therefore, Harry could tell, it was making her deeply uneasy. On the 9th day, Dudley told him he was acting weird. When pressed, Dudley couldn't explain what weird meant, exactly, only that Harry kept looking at things in a way that was different. "Like you're watching," Dudley said, with the uncertain hostility of someone identifying a threat they can't quantify. "Like a dog or something." Harry said, "Thanks," with perfect equanimity and went back to his breakfast, and Dudley stared at him for a full minute before giving up. The morning it changed was a Thursday, overcast, with the smell of rain coming from the north. Harry had been at his exercises for 20 minutes, he was doing the core reach in movement now, walking the perimeter of the park while keeping half his attention on the warm-rooted thing in his chest, when he stopped dead in the middle of the path. Minerva looked up from the bench where she'd been reviewing notes. He was standing very still. His head was tilted slightly. His eyes, behind the taped glasses, were doing something she had not seen them do before, they were tracking, moving in small rapid increments across the tree line, the way an animal's eyes move when they've caught a scent and are triangulating. "Harry," she said. "There's something in the trees," he said. "On the left." It moved, not wind, it moved wrong for wind. He paused. "Fox," he said. I don't know how I know that, but I know it's a fox." She turned. In the undergrowth at the far edge of the park, barely visible between the brambles, a red fox sat and watched them with amber eyes. It turned and vanished into the brush a moment later. Harry turned to look at her. His expression was a complicated mixture of wonder and something that looked almost like alarm. "I smelled it," he said. "I'm standing here in my human body and I smelled it." "Yes," she said. "Come here." He came and sat beside her on the bench and she looked at him carefully, the way she would have looked at a student whose spell had just done something unexpected, not frightened, not excited, just observant. "What you just experienced is called resonance bleed," she said. "Your Animagus core is active enough now, because we've been working with it, that it's starting to influence your human senses. This is not alarming. It is, in fact, a sign of considerable progress." She paused. "It does, however, mean we need to move to the next stage sooner than I anticipated." "The partial transformation?" "Not yet. Before that, we need to determine your form with certainty." She turned to face him properly. "I want you to do the core reach right now, but instead of simply feeling the edges of it, I want you to reach into it. Not try to change anything, just look. As if you were looking into water to see what was underneath." He nodded, settled, closed his eyes. She watched his breathing slow. She watched his hands, resting on his knees, go from slightly tense to still. She watched the line of his shoulders change, something in his posture shifted, subtle but definite, something in the angle of his head, she leaned forward slightly. For approximately 4 seconds, the boy sitting on the park bench was not quite a boy. It was barely visible. It was the way heat shimmer looks, a distortion in the air around his outline, a suggestion of something else overlaid on his shape. It was there and then it was gone, and Harry opened his eyes. He was breathing harder than he had been. His eyes were very wide. "What did you see?" she asked, keeping her voice level. "Antlers," he said. He touched his forehead, almost involuntarily. They felt like mine." She looked at him for a moment. "A stag, then," she said, and there was something in her throat she was managing carefully. "Like your father." "Like my father," he repeated, and his voice had a quality she recognized, the quality of a person picking up something they didn't expect to be heavy and finding it heavier than they thought, in a way that wasn't entirely bad. The weight of inheritance. The weight of connection. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes," he said, and then, "Did you know him?" "My dad. I was his head of house for 6 years and his transfiguration teacher. I knew him reasonably well." "Was he?" He stopped. Started again. "What was he like?" She thought about how to answer this honestly. James Potter had been many things: brilliant, maddening, loyal to a fault, prone to showing off, the kind of person who filled a room without meaning to. He had also, in his 7th year, become someone who deserved the good things that came to him, and that was the truth she wanted to give this child. He was someone who figured out, eventually, that being remarkable didn't require being cruel, she said. He got there later than he should have and faster than most people do. He was very brave. He loved your mother very much. She paused. "You have his hands." Harry looked at his hands. He didn't say anything else for a moment, but the thing that was carefully guarded behind his face shifted again, and this time she let herself acknowledge what it was. He was grieving. He had always been grieving, probably, it was just that no one had ever handed him enough information to grieve with, and now she had given him a fragment and he was holding it carefully, like someone who has been given a piece of a broken thing and is starting to understand the shape of what it was whole. "Can we do more today?" he asked, after a while. "Yes," she said. "Let's work on the reach." The library trip happened in the 3rd week. Minerva had decided Harry needed access to certain texts that were not in the Hogwarts library and therefore couldn't be brought to him through her usual channels, specifically, Adalbert Waffling's foundational work on magical cores, which existed in a Muggle-accessible edition at the London Library, and 2 volumes on Animagus theory that she tracked to the Charing Cross Road branch of Flourish and Blots, which was accessible through the Leaky Cauldron. She appeared at number 4 on a Saturday morning and told Petunia Dursley that she was Harry's tutor, that Harry had been identified as academically gifted and would benefit from a day in London with access to specialist resources, and that she would have him back by 6. The look on Petunia's face was extraordinary. It moved through suspicion, hostility, calculation, and a peculiar species of social anxiety in under 3 seconds, the anxiety of a woman who desperately wanted to appear normal and had just been confronted with the implication that accepting this claim would be the normal thing to do. "Fine," Petunia said, and closed the door before she could change her mind. Harry appeared at Minerva's elbow. "How did you do that?" "I didn't do anything. I simply spoke to her in a register she associates with authority and assumed she would cooperate." She glanced at him. "People usually do, if you don't give them time to think about it." "That's very Slytherin of you," he said. She gave him a sharp look. "Where did you hear about Slytherin?" "Books," he said. "Mrs. Figg's books. She's got a whole collection of wizarding history, did you know that? She's been very helpful actually, even if she doesn't know it." He paused. "Can we take the tube?" The Leaky Cauldron was Harry's first contact with the wizarding world, and Minerva watched him experience it with the same close attention she'd been giving him since the start. He was, she decided, watching him walk through the pub and into the revealed brightness of Diagon Alley, like a cat in a new space. Not overwhelmed. Not performing excitement. Moving with careful deliberate interest, turning to look at things, cataloging them, checking them against something internal. "It's loud," he said, standing at the entrance to the alley. "It's always loud." "Not, I don't mean the sound." He looked around. "The magic. It's everywhere. It's like," he paused, searching for words. "Like turning up the volume on something that was always there." She watched him. The resonance bleed again, she thought. His senses were reading the concentrated magical environment the way a compass reads north. "Come on," she said. "There's a bookshop." Flourish and Blots was moderately busy for a Saturday morning. Minerva found her volumes quickly and turned to tell Harry she'd be another few minutes checking the index of the second one, and found that Harry was no longer directly behind her. She found him 2 minutes later in the back corner of the shop, sitting on the floor between the shelves, cross-legged, a very large book open across his knees. Sitting beside him, also on the floor, also cross-legged, was a boy she did not immediately recognize. Stocky, round-faced, sandy-haired, with the specific expression of someone who has just discovered another human being interested in the same thing they're interested in and is both delighted and slightly unsure how to handle it. "You've met someone," she observed. Harry looked up. "This is Neville. His gran brought him to get school books. He found the same book I was looking at." Neville Longbottom, she recognized him now, recognized the name even if the face was unfamiliar, looked up at her with wide eyes and said, "I wasn't doing anything wrong, Professor." "How do you know I'm a professor?" "Harry said you were his." He stopped. Looked at Harry. "She's my tutor," Harry said smoothly, with the ease of someone who has been managing adults' information diet for most of his life. "She teaches at Hogwarts." Neville relaxed incrementally. "I'm going to Hogwarts next year," he said. He stopped himself. Something flickered across his face. "Gran says I'll get my letter." Minerva looked at the book they'd both been reading. It was a volume on magical theory aimed at young adult readers, not a core textbook, more a popular science approach to the nature of magic. The page it was open to was titled The Instinct and the Intellect, How Children Experience Magic Before Training. "What drew you to this section?" she asked Neville. "I do strange things," he said, with the flatness of someone who has said this before in less sympathetic company. "My gran says it's magic, but it doesn't feel like what she describes. It feels more accidental. Like something else is doing it." "That is magic," Minerva said. "You're describing uncontrolled magic perfectly accurately." He looked at her with the expression of someone who has been told they've been doing something right and hasn't decided yet whether to believe it. Then he looked at Harry, who gave a very small nod, and something in Neville's shoulders eased. They spent another hour in the shop. Harry and Neville moved through the shelves with the particular energy of two children who have simultaneously discovered they are allowed to take up space in a place that was made for them. Neville, Minerva noted, had a genuine intuitive grasp of magical theory despite his apparent lack of confidence about his own abilities. He asked good questions and listened to the answers rather than just waiting for his turn to talk. Harry, for his part, drew Neville out in the way she was starting to identify as his specific interpersonal skill, by treating what the other person said as obviously worth engaging with, as if it had never occurred to him that it might not be. They exchanged addresses at the door of the Leaky Cauldron. Old-fashioned letter addresses, because neither of them had an owl. "He doesn't know he's good at things," Harry said, as they walked toward the tube station. "No," Minerva agreed. "He's been told otherwise." "His gran?" "Not intentionally, I suspect." Harry thought about this. "Do you think he'd be interested in what I'm doing?" "The training." Minerva looked at him. "Are you asking me to take on a second student?" "I'm asking if you think he'd want to know more about why his magic feels the way it does." She was quiet for a moment. "Neville Longbottom's magical issues are of a different nature to yours. He is not an Animagus. But you are correct that some of what we've been doing, the core reach exercises, the attunement, would be useful for him." She paused. "I'll consider it." "That means yes," Harry said. "That means I'll consider it." He almost smiled again. It was more than the almost he'd managed in the garden. It was close enough that she could see the full shape of what a real smile might look like on that face, and it occurred to her, not for the first time, that the person he was becoming was someone entirely worth knowing. The last week of the month brought rain and, more significantly, a partial transformation. It was unplanned, which was not ideal. But looking back later, Minerva thought it couldn't have gone any other way. The kind of magic Harry had didn't do things neatly on schedule, and she'd known that from the wall. They were in the park, working through the reach exercise. Harry had been trying to hold the awareness of his core while simultaneously holding a conversation, which was the current difficulty, when the dog appeared. It was a large dog, off-lead, the kind that doesn't know its own size. It came around the corner of the path at speed and went straight for Harry, not aggressively, just thoughtlessly, the way large dogs run into things they haven't noticed yet, and it was large enough that the impact would have knocked a 10-year-old flat. Harry didn't move back. He squared up to it, and the dog, the large, bounding, unstoppable dog, stopped. 4 feet away, suddenly uncertain, head dropping, eyes going sideways. It sat down. Completely. It sat down and put its ears back in the posture of a dog deferring to something larger and more significant than itself. Harry looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at his hands. Minerva looked at his hands too. His fingers, specifically his first 2 fingers on each hand, had, elongated was not quite the word, but the proportions were wrong, and the nails were wrong, and for approximately 6 seconds before he pulled the transformation back, instinctively, without knowing what he was doing, the hands of a 10-year-old boy had looked, around the edges, like the fronts of something that had hooves. The dog got up and trotted away with the confusion of someone who has walked into a room and forgotten what they came for. Harry turned to look at her. He was breathing hard. "Did I just?" "Yes," she said. "A partial transformation. Hands and fingers, lower joints. You held it for 6 seconds and released it without assistance." She kept her voice very measured. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been running," he said. "But in reverse." He flexed his fingers, which were entirely normal again. "It didn't hurt." "It rarely does, with naturals." "Does it feel like it could have gone further?" He thought about it seriously. "Yes," he said. "Like it wanted to. Like I was holding a door half open." "That is exactly right." She looked at him steadily. "Harry. What you just did, without preparation, without a wand, at the age of 10, I want you to understand the significance of it. Most adult witches and wizards never achieve what you just did. Not once. Not accidentally." She paused. "You are going to need to learn control, and quickly, because that," she pointed to where his hands had briefly been something else. "That cannot happen at Privet Drive, or at school, or anywhere you can't manage the aftermath." He nodded, completely serious. "Teach me the control then." "That," she said, "is what we're doing." "Right." He sat back down on the bench. "Can we go again?" She sat across from him. The rain had stopped somewhere during all of that and the park was wet and bright and smelling of cut grass and ozone, and the boy across from her, too small, too serious, with sellotape on his glasses and his father's hands, put his palms on his knees and closed his eyes and reached for his core with the focused ease of someone who has been doing this for years, not weeks. She thought, Albus has no idea what he's done. She thought, good. She thought, I'm going to need to make some decisions very soon about how much to tell him. But those thoughts were for later. Right now, the boy needed a teacher, and she was here, and that, at least, she could do right. Good, she said, when she felt the warm-rooted hum of his core reach toward her cat instincts like a second son. Hold it there. Don't push. Just be it. He breathed. The park was quiet. Something was beginning. Chapter 2, First Feathers and Fur. The letter from Neville arrived on a Tuesday, written in handwriting so careful it looked like someone had been practicing. Dear Harry, my Gran says I can write to you but that I should make sure you know that she will be reading my letters first, so if there's anything private you shouldn't put it in. She also says I should ask whether your guardian, she wrote guardian, not tutor, I think she checked, is a registered member of the Hogwarts staff. I told her yes. She seemed mostly satisfied. I've been doing the breathing exercise. It's working, I think. My magic knocked over a vase yesterday and it was my fault, but it felt different than usual, like I knew it was coming half a second before. Is that normal? Also, I found 2 more books you might like at the shop on Charing Cross Road, One is about animal intelligence and the other is called the deeper current, which sounds boring but isn't. Write back if you can. I don't have loads of friends who know about magic. Neville. Harry read it at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning before the Dursleys were up, and then read it again. Then he got out the notebook Minerva had given him, plain, green-covered, Muggle, and wrote back. He told Neville yes, the half-second warning was normal and meant his attunement was developing. He told him about the fox in the park. He said he'd look for the books. He signed it Harry and then looked at the signature for a moment before adding, under it, in smaller writing, I don't either. He folded it twice and put it in the backpack Minerva had given him, which now lived under a loose floorboard under his cot in the cupboard. The backpack contained, for books on magical theory, a notebook, a pencil, a small leather pouch with a Muggle map of Surrey in case he needed to meet Minerva somewhere different than planned, and a smooth grey stone that he'd picked up from the park 3 weeks ago and kept because it fit his palm in a way that felt right when he was working on the reach exercise. He did not examine why he kept the stone. He just kept it. Minerva arrived at the end of the garden at 5:28 and found Harry already there, sitting in the wet grass with his notebook open on his knee, writing something. You're 2 minutes early, he said, without looking up. You're sitting in damp grass. I don't mind wet. He finished writing and looked up. I want to try the partial transformation deliberately today. Not wait for it to happen. She had expected this. She'd been expecting it since the moment in the park 4 days ago when he'd looked at his hands with that expression she was coming to know, not shock, just a kind of fierce, focused recognition, the way a chess player looks at the board when they've just seen 3 moves ahead. That's not the next stage, she said. I know. You said the next stage is learning to hold the core state without the full reach. But I've been doing that for 4 days and I can hold it for, he checked something in the notebook. 6 minutes and 40 seconds, I timed it. That was this morning. And I can maintain it through basic activity. I tested it while Aunt Petunia had me reading, and the partial happened without me trying in a much less controlled situation than this. He looked at her steadily. I'm ready for the next stage. She looked at him. He looked back. The thing about Harry Potter, she was discovering, was that he did not argue by escalating. He argued by presenting evidence. It was far more difficult to counter than shouting. Show me the 6 minutes and 40 seconds, she said. He sat cross-legged, rolled his sleeves up to his elbows in the businesslike way he always did before exercises, placed his hands on his knees, and went to his core. She felt it, the warm radiating pulse that hit her cat instincts like a tuning fork on glass, and watched the clock on her watch. 6 minutes. 6:30. At 6 minutes and 50 seconds she said, enough. He came out of it clean, no disorientation, no shake in his hands. He looked at her with his eyebrows raised. Fine, she said. We'll approach the partial transformation. But I am directing this, and when I say stop, you stop immediately, regardless of what it feels like from the inside. Are we clear? Yes. I mean it, Harry. Incomplete transformations that are abandoned carelessly can result in held states, where part of you remains in transition. It's uncomfortable and visible and very difficult to reverse without help. I understand. Good. Now. She sat across from him and thought about how she'd learned this herself, 43 years ago, in a broom cupboard, with no one to direct her, making it up as she went and getting it mostly right by accident. The instinct had carried her. She was going to give this boy something better than accident. Reach your core. When you're there, I want you to imagine pressing on it. Not pushing through, just pressure. Like testing a door without opening it. He nodded, closed his eyes. The morning smelled of wet grass and coming heat. Somewhere in the hedges a wren was making a sound completely disproportionate to its size. Harry sat very still. The air around him did the shimmer thing she'd seen before. Then something more definite than shimmer, the line of his forearm shifted, the proportion changing, the skin taking on a quality that was not quite skin, a density and texture that suggested something layered, something. Stop, she said. Hold it right there. Don't go further. He went very still. She leaned forward. His left forearm, just the left, which was interesting, had partially transformed. The skin from elbow to wrist had taken on the beginnings of a heavier quality, a suggestion of the sleek muscled thickness of a deer's leg, the texture faintly different, and at his wrist where the hand began there was the very beginning of a different structure, a denser joint. It wasn't grotesque. In fact, it was rather beautiful, the overlap of two forms, like a drawing with two expositions. How does it feel? She asked. Warm, he said. His voice was steady but deeper than usual, which she noted. And like there's more of me. Like I'm bigger than I look. That's the stag's proprioception. Its sense of its own body. You're picking up its weight and dimensions. She looked at the arm. Can you reverse it on my word? Yes, he said, with certainty. Reverse. He reversed it. Clean, smooth, no hesitation. His arm was a 10-year-old's arm again. He opened his eyes. Both hands this time, he said immediately. Give me a moment to note what just, both hands, he said. I can feel the difference between left and right. The right is, it's easier. It wants to go first. I think it's something about handedness. I want to understand the asymmetry. She stared at him. He stared back. Both hands, she said. By the end of the morning they had achieved, both hands and forearms, cleanly and at will. A brief and accidental full-leg transformation on the left side that Harry reversed before she'd finished saying stop, doing it so fast it was clear his instincts had already known it had gone too far. A moment, just a moment, when she'd seen the ghost of an antler above his left temple before it pulled back. Harry was sitting in the grass with his knees drawn up and his notebook open, writing rapidly. You're going to run out of pages, she said. I've got 2 more. He didn't look up. When you transformed, the first time you went all the way, what was the moment it worked? What changed? She thought back. 43 years. A broom cupboard. The smell of shoe polish and old Quidditch pads. I stopped thinking about it, she said. I'd been trying to force it for weeks. The night it worked, I was exhausted and I stopped trying to make it happen and just, let the instinct move. He wrote something. So the intellectual part gets in the way. Ultimately, yes. The theory and the exercises build the path. But the transformation itself requires you to step out of your head and let the magic do what it already knows how to do. And you can't get there without the path first. Correct. The instinct needs a trained channel, or it will transform you into something incomplete, or partially, or with no ability to return. She paused. That is why people who attempt this without training end up stuck. The magic is willing. They simply haven't built a way back. He looked up. Is there anyone else like me? Who's been through this training at my age? The honest answer was no. The closest precedents were historical. There was a Welsh girl in the 16th century who had transformed at 11 without training and had been found in the New Forest a week later unable to change back, and a boy in the 1890s who had achieved transformation at 13 after 2 years of intensive private tutoring and had gone on to become one of the most accomplished animagi of the modern era. Harry's situation was somewhere between these two, the raw instinct of the first, the structured approach of the second. Not in my direct experience, she said. But you're managing it better than the historical cases suggest you should, so perhaps the comparison isn't useful. You researched it. Of course I researched it. He almost smiled. The almost smile was evolving. It was getting closer. Am I going to make it to a full transformation before school starts? That depends, she said, entirely on you. He looked down at his notebook. Then back up at her with those sharp green eyes that were his mother's. She had always thought, Lily's eyes, Lily's particular quality of attention, the feeling of being truly looked at rather than just seen. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "Tell me. If the Dursleys notice, and Dudley's already said something, do I need a cover story? Because right now I don't have one. And if something happens at school in September and I haven't learned to control it, that's a problem." "The control," she said, "is what we're building now." "I know. But I also want a plan B." He paused. "I'm good at planning B." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you been managing the Dursleys?" "Since I could think clearly." "Maybe 5. He said it without self-pity, which was worse than self-pity would have been. "Just a fact, stated plainly, the way you state that the sky is gray and you've brought a jacket. Dudley hits things when he's bored, but if you give him something to be annoyed at early in the morning he uses up his energy on that and then he's not looking for you by afternoon. Uncle Vernon has 3 expressions, happy, irritated, and apoplectic. You keep him in the first 2 and stay away from him when he transitions." He looked at his notebook. "Aunt Petunia knows something is wrong with me but she doesn't want anyone else to know she knows, so she mostly looks away." Minerva said nothing for a moment. She was aware of a deep, cold anger sitting in her chest, the kind that doesn't blaze but burns at a consistent, low temperature, like an ember that has been burning for 9 years without being fed. "You have been very alone," she said, because it needed to be said to him plainly by someone. He looked at her. Something in his face went careful again. "It's fine. I'm not saying it to make you feel badly about it. I'm saying it because it's true, and you deserve to have it acknowledged." He looked at the grass. Looked back up. "Okay," he said, quietly. "Okay," she said. "Now. The cover story, since you want one, you are experiencing a growth phase, your joints are changing, and you are also apparently developing a heightened sensitivity to environmental stimuli. Petunia will not pursue this. She would rather believe any mundane explanation than the magical one." She paused. "For Hogwarts, the teachers will be informed, discreetly, that you have a unique magical profile that requires managed attention. That is entirely normal for students with strong instinctual magic. Will you tell Dumbledore?" The question landed with the precision of a well-thrown knife. "Not yet," she said, carefully. He looked at her for a long moment. "When?" "When I decide it is necessary. And right now it isn't." "Right now," she said, "the only person who needs to know what you can do is me, and the only person who needs to decide what happens next is you. Dumbledore has the whole picture of many things. I would like you to have the whole picture of yourself before anyone else gets an opinion about it." He held her gaze. Then nodded, once, the decisive single nod that meant he'd filed something under settled. "Right," he said. "Can we do another session this afternoon?" 3 o'clock, she said. "And bring the notebook." She was 3 streets from Privet Drive, heading for the apparition point behind the community center car park, when she stopped walking. There was nothing visible. Nothing she could point to. Just a feeling, the particular raised awareness of her cat form trying to communicate something to the rest of her, the instinct that had kept her alive through 2 wars pressing up against her conscious mind like a hand on a shoulder. She stood still on the pavement and let it clarify. Something had noticed Harry. Not just noticed. Something had been in the vicinity, not close, not recent, but within the last 24 hours something with a magical signature that was old and wrong in the specific way that old and wrong things were, the way a room smells wrong when something has died in the walls. She stood on the pavement for a full minute. Then she walked back to the community center car park, but instead of operating, she transformed. The tabby cat that padded down Privet Drive that afternoon did 2 full loops of the neighborhood, checked every garden wall and hedgerow, spent 7 minutes sitting under a car outside number 11 and cataloging everything the breeze brought her. The wrongness was there. Faint. Eastern direction, which meant it had come from the direction of the railway line, which meant it had been mobile. Not resident. Passing through, then. Or checking. She sat under the car for a long time and thought about this, and what she thought was, too soon. She had believed, everyone had believed, Dumbledore most of all, that certain threats were dormant. Not eliminated, never eliminated, but dormant. The events of 5 years past were supposed to have bought time. The faint wrongness in the Surrey air suggested the time was running shorter than they'd thought. She transformed back, straightened her robes, and went to make a phone call from the public box on the high street. "What do you know about Professor Quirrell?" Harry asked, on a Thursday evening in early August. It was a different kind of question from his usual ones, not theoretical, not about technique. His voice had the tone she'd started to recognize as his "I've noticed something" register. She looked up from the text she'd been reviewing. "Why do you ask?" "I was reading about the Hogwarts staff. One of the books Mrs. Figg has is an old copy of Hogwarts, a history, and it's a bit out of date, but it mentions a defense against the dark arts teacher called Quirrell. And then I found a mention of him in a newer book and he's different. Like, the book says he was fine, and then he went on a sabbatical and came back and now everyone describes him as nervous and jumpy, and that's interesting. Because nervous and jumpy after a sabbatical means something happened on the sabbatical." She looked at him steadily. "Where are you going with this?" "Somewhere you probably don't want me to go," he said. "But I'm going there anyway, because I have a feeling about it." He paused. "What's in the school this year?" "Something important. Something Dumbledore's protecting. Because there's a whole section in the Hogwarts history about the school's security enchantments and one paragraph that's been very carefully worded to sound like nothing interesting is happening while actually describing a recently added layer of protection. And then there's the changed Quirrell. And then there's," he stopped. "Then there's what?" His green eyes were very direct. "The thing you felt. 3 streets away. I could tell something had shifted. You were different in the afternoon session than the morning one. Quieter. Like you'd decided something." She considered him. He looked back at her, patient, giving her time to work through whether to be honest or to manage. She chose honest. She always chose honest with him, she was finding. "Something passed through this area," she said. "A magical signature I recognized, or, the echo of one." She paused. "You know who Voldemort is?" "Yes," he said, without flinching. Most adults couldn't say the name without at least a small flinch. He said it the way you say the name of a weather pattern, accurate, neutral, acknowledging the danger without dramatizing it. "He killed my parents and he tried to kill me. His body was destroyed 10 years ago. His spirit was not. He has been, existing, in some form, without a host, without physical presence, for a decade." She watched his face. "The signature I detected was old and wrong in the way of things that are not entirely alive. I believe he may be in this area, or passing through it, for reasons connected to your presence." Harry was quiet. "He's been tracking me," he said. "Not a question." "I believe so." "Yes. Because of what happened when he tried to kill me. That is my current theory." He turned this over. She watched him do it, that interior turning over process that was so characteristic of him, thorough and unafraid. "He doesn't know about what I'm doing," he said. "The training." "No. And if he did, would that change his approach?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "Because right now he's tracking a 10-year-old who lives in a cupboard under the stairs," Harry said. "And that's one kind of problem. But next year he's tracking a 10-year-old who can partially transform and who knows he's being tracked." A pause. "That's a different kind of problem." "For him, yes. I was going to say for both of us," Harry said. "But yes. For him too." There was a long silence in the park. The evening was cooling. Somewhere nearby someone was mowing their lawn in long, lazy passes. "I'm not afraid of him," Harry said. It wasn't bravado. It was simply accurate, delivered in the same register as everything else he said. I know that sounds like something you're supposed to be afraid of. But I've been afraid of things that were present and immediate and physical, and he's not that yet. He's a signature on the air. He looked at his hands. And I'm getting stronger. Don't become complacent, she said, sharply enough that it carried. I'm not, he said. There's a difference between not being afraid and not being careful. He looked at her. You taught me that, actually. The second week of August brought a heat wave and Neville Longbottom. He appeared in the park on a Tuesday afternoon, slightly flustered, with a letter from his grandmother that he pressed into Minerva's hands before sitting down next to Harry in the grass. She wants to meet you, he told Minerva. She's looked you up. She's quite impressed, but she wants to meet you. She said tell you she also had Professor Dippet and she'd like to compare notes. Minerva read the letter. Augusta Longbottom's handwriting was large and decisive and marginally threatening. She's invited me to tea, she said, slightly surprised. She invites everyone to tea, Neville said. It's how she decides if she trusts them. He paused. She trusted Harry's letter, though. She said he writes like someone worth knowing. Harry looked mildly startled by this, the way he looked startled whenever someone said something directly positive about him, briefly off balance, like he'd expected different footing and had to recalibrate. Tell her thank you, he said. She also said, Neville continued, with the expression of someone reporting news they're not entirely sure of, that if Professor McGonagall is doing something useful with Harry, she'd like to know if it would work for me too. As I said, Minerva told Harry. I'll consider it. You said yes, Harry said. I said I'd consider it. The answer is yes, Harry told Neville. Neville looked between them with the expression of someone watching a tennis match they hadn't known was happening. Right, he said. What Neville turned out to be, practically speaking, was an excellent foil for Harry's exercises. His magic was entirely different in character, where Harry's was kinetic and instinct-driven, reaching toward transformation the way a compass needle reaches north. Neville's was deep and earth-rooted and slow, more like pressure building in the ground than like anything airborne. He was not going to be an Animagus. But the attunement exercises helped him, visibly and quickly. Within 3 days of starting the core reach practice, he was controlling his accidental magic with a consistency that startled him. It's like knowing where my hands are, he said, on the third morning, looking at the space around him with a new kind of attention. Before, it was like reaching for something on a shelf in the dark. Now there's a lamp. That is exactly what attunement is, Minerva said. Did Harry have that? The dark part? Differently, Harry said, from where he was stretched on his back in the grass, apparently staring at clouds but actually, she knew, holding his core state and working on extending the duration. Mine was already lit when I got there. But it was pointing in a direction I didn't understand yet. Neville considered this. That sounds better and worse at the same time. It is better and worse at the same time, Harry agreed. The dynamic between them was comfortable in the way that dynamics are comfortable when they've been built on genuine mutual recognition rather than proximity or circumstance. Neville was funnier than he appeared at first, dry and self-deprecating, with occasional observations delivered so quietly that it took a second to realize they were quite sharp. Harry, with someone whose company he trusted, was less contained, not louder, but more present, warmer, quicker to respond. Watching them together, Minerva thought they would be good for each other at school, where they would both need someone who knew who they actually were rather than what they represented. Neville was the heir of a famous Auror family with a complicated legacy. Harry was the boy who lived. Both of those identities were traps, and they were better off having at least one person nearby who could see past them. The transformation happened on a Wednesday. August the 14th. Overcast, warm, slight wind from the southwest. Harry had been awake since 4, which she didn't know until after, when he told her he'd been too restless to sleep. He'd been sitting in the garden when she arrived, not on the step, but in the middle of the lawn, cross-legged, and the air around him was already doing the shimmer thing. You've been in the core state since 4 o'clock, she said. On and off, he said. His voice had the slightly resonant quality it got when he was deep in attunement. Something's different today. She sat across from him and felt it immediately. The hum of his Animagus core was stronger than she had felt it before, not just the warm pulse of his exercises but something bigger, like a wave instead of a current. It hit her cat instincts hard enough that she felt a sympathetic resonance, her own form wanting to respond in kind. Do you feel ready? She asked. I feel like it's happening whether I'm ready or not, he said. I just wanted you here when it does. That landed in her chest in a way she didn't examine until later. Listen to me, she said. The first transformation is disorienting. Your sense of your own body will change completely and very quickly. The most common failure point is when people panic at that disorientation and try to reverse before the transformation is complete. Half states are much more difficult to manage than finished states. So when it starts, the only thing I need you to do is trust it. Don't reverse. Let it finish. I will be here the entire time. He looked at her. And if something goes wrong? I'll pull you back. Can you do that? I'm an Animagus who has been doing this for 43 years and I am also a fully qualified professor of transfiguration. I can do that. Something in his expression relaxed. Not completely, Harry never relaxed completely, she'd come to understand that this was just how he was, the alertness was structural, but enough. He nodded. Go to your core, she said. He did. The morning was very quiet. She watched the shimmer build. It was stronger than before, strong enough now that the air around him was visibly distorting, and the light was bending slightly, the way it bends around heat. She could feel it in her sternum, his core radiating like a second sun, reaching, pressing against the boundary between his two forms. His breathing slowed. Then stopped. Then changed. It happened faster than she'd expected. Animagus transformations for adults typically took between 30 seconds and 2 minutes and were accompanied by varying degrees of evident effort. She had watched James Potter's first complete transformation, which had taken 45 seconds and left him flat on the floor of the Transfiguration classroom laughing. She had watched Sirius Black's, which had been faster and accompanied by a sound like a thunderclap. Harry's transformation took 11 seconds. No sound. No apparent effort. Just the shimmer building and building until it wasn't a shimmer anymore, it was a light, and then the light resolved, and where the boy had been sitting cross-legged in the Surrey grass there was a stag. He was young. Everything about him was young, the lines of him not fully filled out, the proportions slightly coltish, the way his weight was distributed suggested a body still growing into itself. But the antlers were there, already, small and velvet-covered and precisely real, and his eyes were the same color they'd always been, that startling green, his mother's green, and they were fixed on her with the same sharp-focused intelligence that had been watching her from the front step 4 weeks ago. She breathed out slowly. Good, she said, very quietly. Stay still. Just feel it. He stayed still. His nostrils flared, he was smelling, she knew, smelling everything, the world coming apart and reorganizing itself around him in a completely different language of scent and sound. His ears, which were large and mobile and extraordinarily expressive, turned toward a bird in the hedges, then back to her. He blinked. He looked, she thought, exactly like James. The set of the head, the way he held himself even in this form, upright, attentive, with that particular quality of presence. She had always thought James Potter was someone who occupied more space than he physically took up. The stag on the grass confirmed it. She thought, Lily would have loved to see this. She thought, James would have been unbearable about it for the rest of his life. She let herself have 5 seconds of grief, quietly, and then she put it somewhere it wasn't going to get in the way. Transform back when you're ready, she said. Take your time. He took 47 seconds, which was quite long, and she suspected was because he was doing what she'd done at 17, spending every possible moment in the form, learning it, memorizing it, not wanting to leave it yet. When he came back he was sitting cross-legged again, exactly as he'd been, and he looked up at her, and this time the almost smile was not an almost smile anymore. It was real and wide and entirely unguarded, and she thought she would remember it for a very long time. "That," he said, "was the best thing that's ever happened to me." "Yes," she said. "It usually is." He looked at his hands. He looked at the grass where his hooves had been. He looked up at the overcast sky and exhaled, and the exhale had a quality to it, a release, a deep structural exhale, the kind that comes from putting down something very heavy. "It feels like mine," he said. "It feels like something that's actually mine." "It is yours," she said. "No one can take it." He nodded. Looked at his notebook. Then at her. "Do you think my dad felt like this?" "I'm absolutely certain of it." He was quiet for a moment. "I want to write to Neville." "You can write to Neville later. Right now I need you to transform 3 more times, because control means the ability to enter and exit the state consistently, not just once." He made a face, but it was the face of someone who knew she was right and was mildly annoyed about it. "Fine," he said. "But I'm writing to Neville after." "After," she agreed. He went back to his core without ceremony, and the light came again, and the stag stood in the Surrey garden with the velvet antlers and the green eyes, and Minerva sat in the grass across from it and thought, "Albus, you magnificent fool. Look at what you almost missed." The stag looked at her calmly and then went back to smelling the wind. The letter she almost sent to Dumbledore that evening was 9 lines long and said, "There is something you need to know about Harry Potter." She sat with it for 20 minutes. Then she folded it and put it in her desk drawer and left it there. Not yet. He was not ready for Dumbledore yet. Dumbledore would arrive with his particular brand of large picture thinking and strategic warmth, and Harry would be offered a role in a narrative rather than a childhood, and the thing that was fragile and new and entirely Harry's own, the stag, the core, the identity that didn't belong to anyone else, would get absorbed into the game. She had watched it happen before, with other promising students, when the headmaster decided they were important. The importance was real, but it ate the person. Not this one. Not while she had anything to say about it. She left the letter in the drawer and went to bed, and in the morning she was back at the garden wall of number 4, Privet Drive, and Harry was already there. Chapter 3, The Shape of a Stag. The thing about being a stag, Harry discovered, was that the world had opinions about you. Not people. People couldn't see him when he transformed in the park before dawn, in the far corner behind the maintenance shed where the council mowers lived and the grass grew long because no one bothered. But the world did. The birds went silent in the specific way birds go silent when something larger than them is present. Squirrels disappeared up trees with a rattling urgency. Even the wind felt different, hitting the broad plane of his chest differently, carrying information differently, sorting itself into layers of meaning that had nothing to do with temperature or direction and everything to do with what was here and what had been here and how long ago. He'd been transforming twice daily for 12 days. He knew his form the way he knew his own handwriting now, not just the shape of it but the character of it, the particular way the stag moved and held itself and processed the world. He was fast. He hadn't known that yet from the partial transformations, but the first time he'd let himself move as the stag, really move, not just stand still, he'd covered the length of the park in a time that felt less like running and more like the ground moving under him. He could turn on a hair. He could stop from full speed in 2 strides. And the senses. He'd known from the fox encounter that his human senses were leaking. In the stag form it wasn't a leak, it was a flood. He could smell the warm engine smell of the council mowers and, beneath that, the particular grassy sweet sharp smell of rain coming from 40 miles northwest. He could hear the railway line 3 streets away as a constant low vibration that divided itself into individual impacts, will, joint, and behind that the moth-wing sound of something small moving in the hedge roots, and behind that, further away, the unmistakable 2/4 rhythm of a human walking quickly. He could smell them before he heard them. Wrong smell. The kind of wrong that didn't have a precise vocabulary in human language but in the stag's language was completely unambiguous, old and cold and carrying the faint sweet-sick edge of something that had been alive and then had been something else for a long time. He transformed back in under 5 seconds. Found Minerva on the park bench and was there in 12 seconds from the moment of transformation, breathing normally, hands steady. "It's back," he said. "East-northeast. Stronger than last time." She was already on her feet. He'd noticed over the past 2 weeks, a stillness under pressure that was different from ordinary composure. It was the stillness of someone who has decided what to do and is now just executing, with all the noise of anxiety or indecision already processed and discarded. She turned east-northeast and stood for a moment, very still. "Yes," she said. Her voice was the same as always. "How strong?" "Stronger than the last time you felt it?" "Closer. Or more present?" "I can't tell which." He thought about how to describe the smell. "Last time it was like something from far away. This time it's more like a room someone left recently." She turned to look at him sharply. "You smelled it as the stag?" "Yes." "And you're confident in the difference, you know what you're measuring against?" "I've been cataloging this park for 12 days. I know what belongs here." He met her eyes. "This doesn't." She was quiet for a moment in the way that meant she was deciding how much to tell him. He had learned to wait that out rather than push. She always came down on the side of honesty, she just sometimes needed a moment to get there. "I want you to tell me the direction and intensity every time you detect it," she said. "And I want you to do it immediately, not after you've thought about whether to mention it." "I've been doing that." "I know. Keep doing it." She glanced east-northeast. "It's moving." "Which direction?" "Away," she said. "For now." That evening she set wards. He didn't see her do it, but he felt them the next morning, subtle changes in the park's magical landscape, things that registered in his stag senses as slightly brighter spots, like knots in wood that catch the light differently. There were 7 of them. She had placed them at intervals around the park's perimeter and 2 along the path he most often used between the park and Privet Drive. He didn't mention that he'd noticed. But the next day when she arrived he said, "The ward on the corner of Magnolia Crescent, the junction point is slightly off. It's catching the morning commuter traffic and flagging it. You might want to narrow the sensitivity." She stopped walking and looked at him. "The people walking to the station," he said. "They set it off. It's not wrong, the ward's not broken, but if you're using it as an alarm system it'll be noisy." "You can sense the wards," she said flatly. "I felt them this morning." "As the stag." "They smell like you, but cleaner, more deliberate. I don't know how to describe the difference." He looked at her steadily. "I wasn't trying to sense them. They were just there." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, "The sensitivity adjustment you're describing is correct. I'll fix the Magnolia Crescent junction this afternoon." She paused. "The fact that you can detect ward work at that resolution is significant. Should I be worried about it?" "No. You should be interested in it." She turned toward the bench. "Come on. We have work to do, and I want to discuss something with you about the nature of Animagus senses and magical perception, because what you're describing goes somewhat beyond what I expected from your level of development." "Does that mean I'm doing better than expected?" "It means you're doing differently than expected, and I prefer to understand something before I evaluate it." She sat. "Sit down." "That means better," he said, and sat down. He told Neville about the thing following him. Not immediately. It was 2 weeks into August and they were sitting in Mrs. Figg's garden, which had become their unofficial second meeting point when the park was too exposed or too watched. Mrs. Figg herself brought them biscuits and didn't ask questions, with the specific tact of someone who knows more than they're saying and has decided that not saying it is the kindest available option. Harry had been watching Neville work through an attunement exercise, the same core reach routine Harry had spent his first 2 weeks doing, which Neville had taken to faster than either of them expected, because it turned out that Neville's problem had never been magical ability but magical confidence, and confidence was something that grew when you spent time doing something and found it consistently worked. "You're almost there," Harry said. "Your focus breaks on the exhale. Try anchoring it to the inhale instead. Think of the breath in as the moment you arrive rather than the moment you leave." Neville tried it. His expression went from the concentrated frown of effort to something smoother. "Oh," he said. Yeah. You've got it." Neville opened his eyes. He had been getting better at coming out of the state smoothly. Early on he'd surfaced from it blinking and slightly dazed, but now it was clean. "How long did I hold it?" Harry checked. 4 minutes 12. "That's your longest. Last week I couldn't do 40 seconds. Neville turned his hand over in the light, looking at it with the new quality of attention he'd developed, the ability to actually feel what his magic was doing rather than just experiencing its effects as external events. "It's strange. I feel like I've been here the whole time and just figured out where the door was." That's basically what Professor McGonagall said. About the instinct already being there. Harry looked at the garden wall. "Then, there's something I want to tell you." Neville looked at him. He told him about the signature. About the wrong smell. About the wards Minerva had placed. He told it plainly and without drama, which was the only way he knew how to tell things, and watched Neville's face go through several expressions: concern, a kind of sharp attention, and finally something that was not quite fear but was the appropriate calibration of seriousness. "You know who," Neville said. "Yes." "Is tracking you?" "Yes." Neville was quiet. "Does Professor McGonagall know what he wants? What he's looking for?" "She has a theory. There's something at Hogwarts this year, she hasn't told me exactly what but she's told me it's there. Something Dumbledore's protecting. I think Voldemort wants it and I think he's looking for a way in, and he stopped. "I'm either connected to what he wants, or I'm a complication he wants to deal with, or both." "You said his name," Neville said. "Voldemort." "Yes." Neville considered this. "My gran says not to." "I know. I think it's the wrong habit." He turned to look at Neville directly. "Being afraid of saying the name is being afraid of the name. And the name is just a name. The person is the problem, not the word." Neville was quiet for a moment. Then, with visible effort, he said, "Voldemort." His shoulders tightened on the word but he didn't look away. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I can do that." "You don't have to." "No, he paused. "I want to. My parents." He stopped again. Harry waited. "They didn't, they were Aurors. They fought him. And what happened to them, it was his people who did that. And I've been saying you know who like I'm afraid to even acknowledge he exists and that feels wrong, now that you say it like that." He squared his shoulders. "Voldemort. What are we going to do about him?" It was the "we" that Harry noticed. Not you should, but we." He looked at Neville for a moment. "I'm going to learn everything I can before September," he said. "And then I'm going to go to Hogwarts and figure out what he's after and make sure he doesn't get it." "Right," Neville said. "And what am I doing?" "You're getting good enough at the attunement that your magic is reliable under pressure. Because I don't know exactly what this year looks like and I'd rather you were capable of handling yourself." Neville nodded. He said it straightforwardly, the way Harry said things, which Harry appreciated. "I can do that." Mrs. Figg appeared with more biscuits and didn't mention that she'd heard any of that, which Harry was fairly certain she had. The grief hit him on a Tuesday, which was inconvenient. He'd been managing it fine. He had a system. When the thought of his parents came up, which it did more frequently now that he had actual information to think about rather than a vague absence, he filed it for later and focused on what was in front of him. It was the system that had kept him functional at Privet Drive for 10 years and he saw no reason to change it. What he hadn't accounted for was the stag. He transformed at dawn, as usual, in the long grass behind the maintenance shed. The morning smelled of rain and late summer and something sweet sharp from the flower bed at the far end of the park. He moved, trotted, then cantered, along the back fence, the ground under his hooves soft and giving, and the morning was very quiet, and the world was exactly the size it should be from this height and this perspective, and he came around the corner of the maintenance shed and stopped. Because he smelled something. Not the wrong cold smell of the thing that followed him. Something entirely different, warm and old and so deeply familiar that he had no framework for why it was familiar, because he had never, in his memory, encountered it before. A specific animal warmth. A specific movement of air. Something that the stag recognized the way you recognize a room you grew up in. He stood completely still and the smell surrounded him and he knew, with the certainty of a form that was built on older knowledge than his 10 years of human experience, that this smell was his father. Not James Potter. The stag that James Potter had been. The scent of the form, the residue of a presence that had moved through this park, not recently, years ago, but strongly enough and often enough that the land still carried it. Lily and James had lived a street away from the Dursleys before Godric's Hollow. He had known this as a fact. He had not known it as a smell. He stood in the park for a very long time. When he transformed back he sat down in the wet grass immediately, which was unlike him. He sat there with the smell still in his memory, already fading the way things fade when you move between forms, and he put his face in his hands and did not cry, because he had never really learned how, but his chest did something that felt like crying from the inside, a silent structural grief that sat in his sternum and pressed. He heard her come. She sat beside him, not touching him, not immediately saying anything. She was very good at this, at being present without being intrusive, which was probably a teacher skill but felt more personal than that. His scent is still here, Harry said, after a while. His voice was flat and factual and underneath it was everything else. From when they lived here. My dad, the stag, it's still in the park. It's been 10 years and it's still there. Minerva was quiet for a moment. He used to run early in the mornings, she said. Before the rest of the street was up. He did it here, in the park. Harry looked at the grass. He'd have done the same thing you do, she said. Same corner, same route. James liked patterns. Did he know he stopped. Did he know I might be like him? An Animagus? I don't know. He hoped for a great many things for you. I know that from the last time I spoke with him. She paused. He would have been, there are no adequate words, Harry. Incandescent, perhaps. He would have been incandescent. The word hit something in Harry's chest that broke something loose, quietly, without drama. He sat with it. I don't know them, he said. I know facts about them. I know descriptions of them. But I don't know them. He paused. Is that always going to be, is it always going to feel like this? Like holding a map of a place I've never been? She was quiet for a moment. I don't know, she said, honestly. I think it changes. I think as you become more yourself, the fact that they shaped you becomes more present. Not more painful, necessarily, just more real. She turned to look at him directly. What I can tell you is that they would have known you. If they could see you now, what you're becoming, who you are, they would have known you completely. He looked at her. Something in his expression was completely open in a way it rarely was, the careful layering stripped back to something much simpler. You knew them, he said. Both of them. I did. Then, he stopped himself. Reformulated. Tell me something true about them. Not a fact. Something true. She thought about it properly, the way the question deserved. She thought about James in her transfiguration class, performing deliberately imperfect on a test because he'd noticed Remus was struggling and didn't want to draw attention to the gap. She thought about Lily standing in her office, first year, telling her with absolute composure that a third year had been bullying a first-year Muggle-born girl and that Professor McGonagall might want to know, and then waiting with quiet certainty until something was done about it. "Your mother," she said, "never once asked for credit for a kind thing. She simply did the kind thing, immediately, without announcing it, and moved on. I watched her do it dozens of times." She paused. "Your father spent the first 5 years of his Hogwarts career proving he was clever, and the last 2 proving it hadn't made him a good person yet. And then he spent what time he had left actually being one." Harry was looking at the grass. He was very still. "They were brave," she continued. "Not in the abstract, not as a fact, they were brave in the particular, daily way, the kind of brave that means you stand up at inconvenient moments, that you say the wrong thing for the right reason." She looked at him. "You have both of those things in you. I have watched you for 8 weeks and I can tell you that." He didn't say anything for a moment. "Okay," he said, finally, in a voice that was doing a lot of quiet work. "Okay." He looked at his hands. Looked at the part of the park where the scent had been. "Can we do 2 sessions today?" he said. "Yes," she said. And then, because it was true and because he should hear it, he would have been so proud of you. Harry pressed his lips together briefly. Nodded once. Then he stood up, brushed the grass off his knees, and said, "I want to work on speed. I need to know how fast I actually am as the stag." And she let that be what they did, and watched him sprint the length of the park and back, antlers low, hooves throwing up divots of wet earth, fast enough that she had to turn her head to track him, and something in her chest that had been tight for 9 years eased, slightly, because whatever else was coming, whatever that cold signature on the wind intended, the boy had something now. He had himself. Dumbledore's letter arrived on August the 19th. She'd been expecting it, in the way you expect something you've been slightly dreading. He had a particular sensitivity to things developing outside his purview, the headmaster, not magical, or not precisely magical, more the refined instinct of a man who had spent 60 years learning to read the weather of human events. Someone had told him something, or he'd simply felt the change, or perhaps he'd always known and had simply decided it was time to ask. The letter was characteristically Dumbledore, warm, oblique, and carrying approximately 4 times the information density of what it literally said. It asked after her health. It mentioned that he had been reflecting on Harry's situation. It said, in the 11th line, almost as an aside, that he would very much enjoy having tea with her before term began, particularly if there are any developments of note regarding young Harry that you feel I ought to be aware of. She sat with the letter for a long time. The right thing to do was tell him. She knew that. Dumbledore needed to know about the Animagus development, about the signature, about what was gathering on the wind. He had resources she didn't, connections she didn't, decades of strategic experience with the particular enemy they were dealing with. Keeping this from him was not without risk. The other right thing to do was Harry. She thought about the boy on the step, shelling peas. She thought about him saying Aunt Petunia gets up at 6 with the matter-of-fact calm of someone who has arranged his entire life around not being noticed by people who should have cared for him. She thought about him sitting in the park with the smell of his father still in his memory and asking her for something true. She wrote back to Dumbledore and agreed to tea, and she told him there were some developments worth discussing. She did not tell him what they were in the letter. She went to tell Harry first. He took the news that Dumbledore wanted a meeting with her with the same internal processing then response pattern he always used. He sat with it for about 12 seconds. Then he said, "What will you tell him?" "The truth," she said. "The full truth. He needs to know about the Animagus development and about the signature." She watched his face. "I should have told him sooner. The signature changes things. There is a level of threat here that is beyond what I should be managing independently." "I know," he said. Which she hadn't entirely expected. "You've been warding the park and the route home and I've been counting the wards and checking their calibration and you've added 3 since the last time the signature appeared." He looked at her evenly. "I know you're managing something you don't want to tell me is worrying you. She held his gaze. Yes, she said. I am. Because he's getting closer. Because the pattern of appearances is becoming less random. Random surveillance looks like random intervals and variable directions. What we're seeing is, not that. She paused. He is orienting. Harry was quiet. He doesn't know what you can do, she said. He knows you're here, and he knows your magical signature, and he has perhaps some sense of the raw power of your core. But he has no idea about the training. He's expecting a 10-year-old in a cupboard. She looked at him. And that difference, between what he expects and what you actually are, is important. You mean it's an advantage? I mean it is the only advantage we currently have, and I'd prefer to keep it. Harry nodded. Then, when you meet Dumbledore, what do you want to happen afterward? She hadn't framed it quite that way. She thought about it. I want him to reinforce the wards around this area. I want him to tell me what he knows about the nature of the thing we're tracking. And I want his agreement, explicitly, that the knowledge of your abilities remains with us, and that he does not begin making strategic decisions about your future without your awareness and consent. Do you think he'll agree to that last part? No, she said honestly. I think we'll have a significant disagreement about it. She paused. But I have found, over 60-odd years, that having the disagreement explicitly is better than having it happen silently through accumulated decisions. Harry almost smiled again, the real one, the unguarded one she still found striking every time it appeared. He sounds exhausting. He is magnificent and exhausting in equal measure, she said. He is also very possibly the most capable person I know, and he will want to help you. I want you to remember that, when his helping feels like it's about something else. The help is real. Harry thought about this. Like someone who genuinely cares about you but also sees you as a piece on a board. That is an uncomfortably accurate description, yes. I've been dealing with adults like that for 10 years, he said. I'll manage. The meeting with Dumbledore was at his house in Godric's Hollow, which she noted was either thoughtless or deliberate and suspected deliberate, because very little the headmaster did was thoughtless. He was waiting for her in the garden, which was simultaneously wild and cultivated in the way Dumbledore managed to be simultaneously wild and cultivated, half of it overrun with plants that should not have been growing in late August in England, some of which appeared to be growing in defiance of taxonomy altogether. He was wearing violet robes and looking at a rosebush with the serene attention of a man who has recently made several large decisions and is waiting to see how they resolve. Minerva, he said, and turned with the genuine warmth that she had never doubted was real, because you couldn't spend 60 years watching someone and mistake the real warmth for the performed warmth. Tea is inside. Come in. They had tea. They discussed several things that were not the main topic for approximately 7 minutes, which was his usual preamble period, and then she put down her cup and said, Harry Potter is an Animagus. Dumbledore's teacup paused on its way to his lips. She told him everything. She told it precisely, in order, without embellishment, the detection on the wall, the exercises, the partial transformations, the first full transformation, the stag, the scent detection ability, the ward reading. She told him about the signature appearing in the neighborhood and about the shift from random to directional in its appearances. She told him about Neville, briefly. Dumbledore listened to all of it with the stillness he had when information was reorganizing something significant inside him. He set his teacup down when she got to the part about the full transformation and did not pick it up again. When she finished he was quiet for a long time. You didn't tell me, he said. No. For 8 weeks. Yes. May I ask, because he needed to be himself first, she said. Before he was yours. She held his gaze steadily. Before he was the boy who lived or the chosen one or your instrument in whatever is coming. He needed to be Harry, and know who Harry was, before you had an opinion about it. Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his expression, something she couldn't quite classify, which was unusual. She could usually classify his expressions. It might have been acknowledgement. It might have been the specific species of pain that comes from being told something true and accurate about yourself that you had not fully articulated. The signature, he said, eventually. Yes. That needs your attention immediately. It does. He looked at the window, in the direction that would have been east-northeast from here if she'd oriented herself correctly, which she had. Tom has been restless this past year. The item I've placed at Hogwarts was moved from Gringotts in June. I suspect he felt it move. A pause. I had not anticipated him being this present, this active, this quickly. What is the item? He looked at her. Then, with the air of a man who has decided that honesty in this conversation is the only viable currency, he told her. She was quiet for a moment when he'd finished. And you've put that at Hogwarts. With children. With considerable protections. With Harry. I had not, when I placed it, known that Harry, Albus. Her voice was very level. You are going to need to tell him. Not all of it, not yet, but enough that when something happens this year, and something will happen, we both know that, he is not caught completely without context. He's 10 years old. He is 10 years old and he can read ward calibrations by smell in his Animagus form, and he identified that Quirrell was suspicious before anyone mentioned the man's name to him. She leaned forward slightly. Do not make the mistake of treating him as the 10-year-old you placed on that doorstep. He is not that child anymore. I'm not sure he was ever entirely that child. Another long silence. I would very much like to meet him, Dumbledore said, and his voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before, something that was not strategic calculation and not performed warmth but something genuinely uncertain, the voice of a man who is not entirely sure what he's going to find when a door opens. In time, she said. He'll come to Hogwarts in September, and you'll meet him there, and you will endeavor to see him before you see what he represents. She held his gaze. That's what I'm asking. And if I fail to do that? Then I'll tell you, she said, the way I'm telling you now. The headmaster looked at her for a moment. Then, and this was the thing about Dumbledore, the thing that made her forgive him the board and the chess pieces, the thing that had kept her at Hogwarts for 40 years, he smiled, and it was entirely real. You know, he said, you have always been the best of us, Minerva. I know, she said. Drink your tea. She told Harry about the meeting that evening. Not all of it, she didn't tell him about the item, because that was Dumbledore's disclosure to make when the time was right and she wasn't going to take it out of order. But she told him the shape of the conversation, and that Dumbledore now knew, and that additional protections would be placed on the neighborhood within the week. He listened, asked 3 precise questions, and then said, does he think Quirrell is involved with what he's protecting? He has concerns about Quirrell, yes. So the nervous Muggle studies teacher with the interesting sabbatical history is involved with the thing Voldemort wants. He said it with the flat clarity of someone connecting dots that were not, actually, very far apart. And Voldemort is orienting on this neighborhood. And September is 3 weeks away. He looked at her. Do you think it'll start before school? No. He's not ready. What we're seeing is preparation, reconnaissance. He'll move when he has what he needs, and he doesn't have it yet. She paused. But I want you to be careful, Harry. These last weeks before September, no unnecessary exposure, no solo night runs as the stag, and if you detect the signature again, you come to me immediately. I know. I mean it. I know, he said again, steadily. I'm not reckless. No, she said. You're not. She looked at him. You're something considerably more interesting than reckless. He actually smiled at that, full and brief. Then he said, one more session. I want to work on the shift speed. I got to 9 seconds clean yesterday. I want to try for 7. 7 is, ambitious, yes. He was already rolling up his sleeves. So. She sat down across from him in the evening light of Mrs. Fig's garden, and the old tabby cat from 2 streets over wandered in through the gate and sat beside Harry with complete ease, as if it had always meant to, and Harry reached down without looking and scratched it behind the ear. "Right," he said. Counting down from 3. She watched him transform in 6.4 seconds, the stag arriving between one breath and the next, antlers catching the late light, green eyes steady and bright. She would give him these last weeks. She would give him the park and the early mornings and Neville in Mrs. Fig's garden. She would give him this, as much as she could, because September was coming and Hogwarts was coming and the world was going to have a great many opinions about Harry Potter. None of them were going to be as important as the one he'd already formed about himself. The stag stood in the evening garden and breathed in the summer air, and 3 streets away the cold signature was still, for now, quiet. For now. Chapter 4, September 1st. The train was louder than he'd expected. Not the Hogwarts Express itself, he'd expected that, had read about it, had even found a photograph in one of Mrs. Fig's books, the scarlet engine gleaming against the grey of King's Cross. What he hadn't expected was the platform, the sheer compressed noise of a few hundred wizarding families in a space that was, underneath the magic, still a train station, still London, still full of pigeons and diesel and the particular acoustics of iron and glass. His stag senses, which he'd spent 2 months learning to dial down in human form, were giving him a very detailed account of all of it. He stood just inside the barrier with his trolley and took 3 slow breaths and sorted through the noise the way Minerva had taught him to sort through it, not suppression, which didn't work and created pressure, but selection, like turning the focus on a camera lens until only what mattered was sharp. People. Families. Magic everywhere, a warm ambient hum underneath the shouting and the owls and the enormous ginger cat screaming at something on platform 7. Some magical signatures familiar by now, he could feel Neville somewhere ahead of him, the deep earth pressure of his core distinct and recognizable. Some signatures unfamiliar and interesting. Some signatures that were just, background, texture, the wallpaper of the wizarding world. No cold signatures. He checked, automatically, the way he'd been checking for 6 weeks. Nothing wrong. He pushed his trolley forward. Harry. Neville found him before he found Neville, appearing through a gap in the crowd with his grandmother 3 steps behind him and looking considerably more settled than Harry had ever seen him look outside of their training sessions. The past 3 weeks had done something for Neville. He carried himself differently, not with any kind of swagger, just with the particular ease of someone who has stopped bracing for their own magic to embarrass them. "You look different," Neville said, studying him with the attention that their training sessions had given both of them, the habit of actually looking. "So do you. Gran says I'm standing up straight." He glanced back at Augusta Longbottom, who was watching them with a look that was assessing and, Harry thought, cautiously approving. "She's been saying that for 11 years. I think she's just pleased it's finally happening." Augusta Longbottom was a tall woman in a formidable hat with a stuffed vulture on it, and she shook Harry's hand with a grip that said she had decided, provisionally, that he was acceptable and was reserving final judgment for later. "Professor McGonagall speaks highly of you," she said. "She's been a good teacher," Harry said. "She's been an excellent teacher for 60 years. That's not a surprise." She looked at him with the particular sharpness of a woman who had been evaluating people for decades. "What surprises me is that you've managed to actually learn something." "I had good reason to," Harry said. Augusta looked at him for another moment. Then the corners of her mouth moved, fractionally, in what might have been approval. She said, which was clearly Augusta Longbottom's version of a compliment. Neville mouthed that went well from behind her shoulder. The compartment they found was at the back of the train, half empty when they arrived, with the comfortable dust and old velvet smell of something that had been carrying students for decades and had absorbed the history of it. Harry put his trunk up, settled Trevor the Toad into his carry case with a competence that surprised Neville. Harry had apparently developed a facility with animals that extended beyond the stag, which was news even to Neville, and sat by the window. The train pulled out of the station at exactly 11, and London began to slide away. 2 stops into the journey the compartment door opened and a girl appeared in it, looking harassed, with a bushy cloud of brown hair and a book under each arm and a smudge of something that might have been ink on her chin. "Have you seen a toad?" she said. "A boy named Neville has lost one." "I'm Neville," said Neville. "And I haven't lost him. He's right there." The girl looked at the carry case. Looked at Neville. "Oh," she said. "I was told there was a lost toad." There was. He hid under the seat. Harry found him. She looked at Harry. He looked at her. She had the particular alertness of someone who read a great deal and processed things quickly and was trying to decide, in real time, whether she approved of a situation. "Hermione Granger," she said, apparently deciding the situation required introduction. "Harry Potter." "I know. I mean," she stopped. "I read a great deal about modern wizarding history and your name comes up rather often. Usually in context of being a baby," Harry said. "Which doesn't tell you much about the person." She blinked. "That's a surprisingly philosophical response." "It's just accurate." He nodded toward the seat across from him. "Did you want to sit?" "You've been up and down the train for at least 20 minutes, I've been watching people pass in the corridor." She sat, with the slight wariness of someone not used to being invited into things without conditions attached to the invitation. She put her books on the seat beside her, then picked them up again, then put them down again, which Harry read as residual social nervousness rather than actual indecision about the books. "Are you in any particular house?" Neville asked her. "I'd like to be in Gryffindor," she said. "The academic record is, it suggests a broad range of magical aptitude and Gryffindor's alumni consistently." She stopped. "I've thought about it too much, probably." "Probably," Harry agreed pleasantly. She gave him a sharp look, uncertain whether that was gentle mockery or agreement. He held her gaze steadily and after a moment her mouth curved slightly. "Fair," she said. Ron Weasley arrived at their compartment 20 minutes before Hogsmeade with a level of social energy that was the direct opposite of Hermione's cautious precision. He opened the door, said, "Can I? Everywhere else is full," and then upon seeing Harry did a very visible double-take. Yes," Harry said. "Come in." Ron came in, sat down, and spent approximately 30 seconds clearly deciding whether to mention it again before deciding against it. "Ron Weasley," he said instead. "I know your brothers," Neville said. "The twins. They put a dung bomb in the third-floor corridor at my Grand's Christmas gathering last year." "Yeah, they do that," Ron said, with the mixture of exasperation and pride that is unique to siblings. Mum was furious. He produced a bag of chocolate frogs from his pocket and held them out around the compartment with the automatic generosity of someone raised in a large family where sharing was just what you did with food. Harry took one. The card inside was Dumbledore. He looked at the photograph of the silver-bearded headmaster, the twinkling eyes and the half-moon spectacles, the composed grandeur of him, and thought about a garden in Godric's Hollow and a conversation about chess pieces, filtered through Minerva's account of it, which had been accurate enough that he felt he'd been there. "Do you know Dumbledore?" Ron asked, watching him look at the card. "Not yet," Harry said. "I'll meet him tonight. My dad says he's the greatest headmaster Hogwarts has ever had. My mum says he could do with someone reminding him to eat occasionally." "Both of those things can be true," Hermione said. "They can," Harry agreed, and put the card away. Hagrid met them at the station. Harry had known about Hagrid the way he'd known about most of the wizarding world, through books, through Minerva's occasional references, through the architecture of the world he was walking into. He had not expected the scale of the man, which even Minerva's description of him as very large had not quite prepared him for, or the warmth, which was the particular warmth of someone who feels things completely without any intermediate layer of management. "Harry Potter," Hagrid said, with a joy so uncomplicated it was almost architectural. "Last time I saw were," he stopped, seemed to recollect himself, glanced at the students around them. "Well. Good to have ya, Harry." "Thank you," Harry said. "I've been looking forward to this." Hagrid looked at him with a kind of searching attention that Harry recognized, the look of someone trying to match the person in front of them to the image they'd carried. Something in Hagrid's big face settled, gently. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I think you have." The boats were cold and the lake was black and the castle appeared around the cliff face like something the horizon had been keeping secret. Harry looked at it from the bow of his boat. He'd ended up in the front one, with Neville beside him and a girl called Susan Bones and a tall nervous boy who hadn't said his name yet, and felt the magic of it from here, the centuries of it, the accumulated layered power of a place that had been doing something specific and important for a very long time. It hit his senses the way the park's wards had hit them, but bigger, richer, infinitely more complex, layer upon layer of protective enchantment, of accumulated magical history, of something that was not alive in the way he was alive but was not alive either. "You feel it," Neville said quietly, beside him. "Yes." "Is it?" Neville was doing the attunement attention thing, the look he got when he was reading something through his core rather than his eyes. "It's enormous." "It's old," Harry said. "Old things feel bigger from the inside." The castle rose above them as the boats moved toward the cliff base, and somewhere in the upper towers, he could feel it before he could see it, something cold moved across a lit window and was gone. He noted it and said nothing. The entrance hall was everything a castle's entrance hall should be, if the castle had been designed by someone who understood that grandeur should make you want to live up to it rather than feel small. Professor McGonagall met them at the door. She looked exactly as she did every morning in the park, which was somehow surprising. He had half expected her to be different here, more formal, more institutional. But she was precisely herself, and she looked at him when he walked in with an expression that was, by her own very controlled standards, something close to warmth. He gave her a small nod. She gave him one back, fractionally. Ron, beside him, whispered, "Do you know Professor McGonagall?" "She was my tutor," Harry said. Ron stared at him. "Your Transfiguration tutor?" "Among other things." Ron seemed to take a moment to process this. "Fred and George say she took 20 points off Fred for breathing too loud during a lesson once." "That sounds like him breathing too loud." Ron blinked. Then laughed, startled, quickly suppressed. McGonagall's speech to the first years was crisp and informative and gave away nothing about anything, which was exactly what Harry had expected. The ghost tour was interesting mainly for the quality of nearly headless Nick's grievance delivery. And then the great doors opened and the great hall revealed itself, and Harry walked into the light and the noise and the 4 long tables and the enchanted ceiling, dark tonight, stars visible through some kind of transparency charm he could feel the mechanism of, almost, if he reached slightly, and thought, "Here, then. This is where it starts." He was ready. The Sorting Hat was old. He could feel that even from across the room, older than the castle in some ways, older in the way that objects infused with directed and sustained magic become old, carrying the accumulated weight of every purpose they've served. He watched it go through the students ahead of him, learning its patterns. It spent different amounts of time on different students, which was interesting. It seemed to spend longer on the complicated ones. It spent 4 seconds on a girl called Hannah Abbott. Nearly a minute on a boy called Terry Boot, who came out looking slightly stunned. 30 seconds on Neville, who sat down at the Gryffindor table with an expression of profound relief and the small loose grin of someone who got exactly what they wanted and can't quite believe it. Harry went last, because of course he did. The list was alphabetical except the hat seemed to want him last, or perhaps the alphabetical logic had some gap in it, because somehow the pile ran out and he was standing alone. The hall went quiet in a way that was different from ordinary waiting quiet. It was the quiet of several hundred people very suddenly paying attention. He walked to the stool and sat down and the hat dropped over his eyes. Silence. Then a voice, dry, layered, interesting, nothing at all like what he'd expected, said directly into his brain, "Oh. Hello," Harry thought back. "You're doing that deliberately," the hat said. "Actively engaging with the communication rather than just receiving. Is that unusual?" "At 11? "Considerably." A pause that felt like rustling. You are not what I expected. The records, I have some context from the last sorting, a vague forward impression, but this is, another pause. You have two minds. I have one mind, Harry said. But it's had a year of practice living in two forms. Ah. The hat seemed to settle, reconsidering. You are an Animagus. Yes. At 10. 11 now, technically. You achieved transformation before. The hat was quiet for a moment in a way that suggested it was, in whatever way a hat could be, re-evaluating a number of things simultaneously. You know, I have not encountered this before. I've been sorting students for 1,000 years, but not one of them walked in here already having done this. First time for everything. Indeed. The hat's presence moved through him in a way that wasn't unpleasant, thorough, curious, genuinely interested rather than invasive. You are extraordinarily brave. That's the simplest thing. Gryffindor would be, obvious, Harry agreed. You're not arguing against it. I'm not arguing against anything. I'm just noting that the obvious answer and the right answer aren't always the same, and I'm wondering which one you're going to give me. They are, in this case, the same, the hat said, with something that sounded like mild amusement. Though you have considerably more Slytherin in you than most Gryffindors would appreciate being told. The strategic thinking, the patience, the management of information, those are not Gryffindor traits, technically. They're my traits, Harry said. I don't see why the house should own them. Quite. The hat paused again. There is something I should tell you, since you are approaching this as a conversation rather than a sorting. You are not the only remarkable student in this year. There is one other I want you to watch. Who? She came through half an hour ago. Hermione Granger. She is, different from what her profile suggests. Her core is, the hat seemed to search for language. It's not the way the books describe magical cores. Something happened during her first 11 years that changed the architecture of it. I'm not sure she knows. Harry filed that carefully. Thank you. You're welcome. The hat straightened. Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted, which he'd expected. What he hadn't expected, or had he? Was the particular quality of the noise from the staff table, where several professors he hadn't met yet were looking at him with varying expressions of interest, concern, and curiosity. And at the end of the table, behind a turban that was doing a great deal of work for a man who supposedly just had a head cold, Professor Quirrell was looking at him with eyes that were very, very still. Harry met them. Quirrell looked away first. Harry sat down at the Gryffindor table beside Neville, and Ron slid down to make room on his other side, and Hermione appeared across from him with her books already gone and her eyes sharp and interested. There was a cold feeling at the back of Harry's neck, not the wrong signature, something subtler, the way you feel the temperature drop before rain. He picked up his fork and began to eat and thought about the hat's observation and about Quirrell's eyes and about the thing that was somewhere in the castle, somewhere above them, that Dumbledore had placed there and that something very old and wrong wanted. Neville, eating beside him with the specific enthusiasm of someone who hasn't had a proper meal since 6 in the morning, said, "Good start." "Very good start," Harry said. He found the door on the 3rd floor on the 5th day of term, which was 4 days after he'd been told not to go there. He hadn't been looking for it. He'd been doing something Minerva would have approved of, walking the castle, learning it, the way he'd learned the park, cataloging its magical geography, its patterns and anomalies. Hogwarts was full of anomalies, most of them benign, staircases that moved, rooms that appeared and disappeared, areas where the ambient magic was brighter or denser for historical reasons that probably had to do with whatever events had occurred in those spots. The 3rd floor corridor was not an anomaly. It was a deliberate thing, warded heavily and with intent, and the wards were layered in a way he recognized now, Minerva's work in the outer layer, other magic beneath it, and at the center something that pulsed with a specific dense significance. He stood at the door and didn't touch it. He stood there for approximately 30 seconds and then turned around and walked back the way he'd come, because he'd learned what he needed to learn, the location, the feel of the protections, the direction and density of what was inside, and he didn't need to go in. Not yet. Going in before he understood what he was dealing with would be, as Minerva had said once about a different situation entirely, impressive and stupid, and he had spent a year learning the difference between the two. He told Minerva that evening. She was in her office, which she'd said he could come to if anything urgent came up, and which he'd now decided this was. Third floor corridor, he said, from the doorway. Left-hand side. The wards have your signature in the outer layer. She looked at him over her desk. I see, she said. I didn't go in. I know. I would have felt it. She studied him. What did you learn from outside? It's alive, he said. Whatever's in there is alive. Not in the way I'm alive, differently. Like the castle. Old and alive in a different register. He paused. And there's a dog. A large one. Several of them, actually, or one with multiple, he stopped. Multiple heads, he said. Yes. You knew it was a three-headed dog. I did. Is there anything else in there I should know about? She looked at him for a moment. When the time is right, Dumbledore will tell you what he's told me. I will not get ahead of that. She paused. What I will tell you is that your instinct to learn the landscape without entering it was the correct one. I know, he said. I just wanted you to know I'd found it. She held his gaze. Thank you, she said. He went back to Gryffindor Tower, and on the way he passed Quirrell in the third-floor corridor, 30 feet from the door, not going toward it but standing near the window with his back to the world, looking at nothing, or pretending to. Harry walked past him without stopping. Quirrell's magical signature, as Harry moved by, hit him the way the cold signature had hit him in Surrey, but quieter, contained, muffled, as if wrapped in something deliberately dampening. He kept walking. The flying lesson was the second week of September. He'd been on a broom before. Technically, Minerva had let him try one of the school brooms in the park in July, for about 20 minutes, as a test. He'd taken to it the way he'd taken to everything physical, with the fast intuitive calibration that was apparently just how he learned things, and she'd looked at him hovering 4 feet off the ground with the calm competence of someone who'd been doing it for years and said, "You have good instincts for this. Don't show off." He had said he wouldn't. He hadn't, technically, planned what happened at the flying lesson. It was a genuine accident, in that Neville's broom really did take off, and he really did fly up to 40 feet following it, and Neville really did begin to fall, and the decision to leave the broom and intercept Neville in midair, catching him by the arm, transferring his own momentum into Neville's fall in a way that slowed it enough to be manageable, landing them both in a controlled tumble in the grass. That was not a decision he'd made consciously. It was the stag's instincts applied to a flying problem. Read the trajectory. Intercept. Land. He helped Neville up. Neville was winded but unharmed. Around them, the class had gone extremely quiet. Madame Hooch, who had landed and come running at the same time, stopped 3 feet away and looked at him with an expression he couldn't immediately classify. It took him a moment to identify it. It was the expression of a flying instructor who had just watched a student she'd never taught do something that required exceptional spatial awareness, balance, and raw ability, and was reclassifying the student accordingly. "Potter," she said. "I'm sorry," he said, automatically. "Don't be." She looked at the broom he'd landed holding. He'd caught it on the way down, apparently, which he hadn't been consciously aware of doing. That was, she stopped. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Is Longbottom hurt?" "I don't think so." He looked at Neville. "I'm fine," Neville said, with the particular dignity of someone who has just been saved from a significant height and is trying to approach it gracefully. Madame Hooch looked at Harry for a long moment. Then she looked at the broom in his hand, one of the school brooms, ancient and inclined to veer left, and then at the castle, in the direction of the staff wing. "Go to your lesson," she said, to everyone else. And then, to Harry, "You stay here a moment." He stayed. The class filtered away with the specific energy of students who have witnessed something interesting and are vibrating with the need to discuss it. Neville gave him a look that said "I'll see you later" and followed. "How long have you been flying?" Madam Hooch asked. "One afternoon," Harry said, honestly. "In July." She looked at him. "One afternoon." It was a long afternoon. She was quiet for a moment. "I coached the national team for 6 years before coming to Hogwarts," she said. "In those 6 years I saw perhaps 3 players who had what you just demonstrated, and all 3 of them had been on brooms since they could walk." She paused. "Professor McGonagall is your head of house." "Yes. I think she and I need to have a conversation." She looked at the school broom in his hand. "You can keep that for the afternoon. Practice the figure-8 hover. See if you can do it with your eyes closed." He could. He didn't mention that. "Thank you," he said. He found out later, from Ron, who had found out from Percy, who had overheard something in the staff room, that Madam Hooch had in fact had her conversation with Minerva, and that by evening 3 people on the Gryffindor Quidditch team had been told that the new seeker position was being reconsidered. Hermione cornered him in the library on a Thursday. He'd been expecting it, she had been watching him with increasing concentration since the sorting, and he'd felt her working up to something for a week. She sat down across from him and put her hands flat on the table and said, "How did you catch Neville?" "I flew fast and I caught him." "You left your broom. You were in free fall for approximately 3 seconds before you reached him, and then you controlled the descent." She looked at him. "I've read every standard flying text available to first years and some of the intermediate ones, and what you did isn't in them. It's not instinct because instinct doesn't produce that level of spatial control on a first, second, lesson." She paused. "You've been trained." He looked at her steadily. "You're very good at this." "What, noticing things?" "Noticing things and then going to the library and checking them and then coming back to confront the person directly rather than gossiping about it." He meant it straightforwardly, as a compliment. "Yes. I've had training." "In what?" "Specifically." He considered her. He considered the hat's observation about her core being different from its profile. He considered what he'd felt from her in lessons this week, the magic that came off her when she answered a question in class, which was sharp and quick and slightly too big for what the question required, like someone turning on all the lights in a house to read a book. "In magic generally," he said. "Before Hogwarts. That's unusual." "Yes. And the flying is connected to the broader training." "In a way." She looked at him with the assessing look she used when she was deciding whether a source was reliable. "You know something else," she said. "About, here. About what this year is going to be. I've noticed you paying a specific kind of attention to things. Not curiosity, more like, surveillance." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, what do you know about your own magical core?" She blinked. "What?" "The way your magic feels from the inside. When you cast something, or when you answer a question in class and the magic moves, do you feel it?" She stopped. Something crossed her face, surprise, and beneath it something more complicated, the look of someone who has thought about something privately for a long time and hasn't expected anyone to name it. "Yes. It feels larger than it should be. Like it's in the wrong container." He nodded. The Sorting Hat noticed. "It said your core's architecture is different from your profile. Something happened when you were growing up that changed it." She was very still. "How do you know what the hat said?" "I had a longer conversation with it than most people do." "The hat doesn't, it does," he said. "If you're actually talking to it rather than just being sorted." She was quiet for a long moment, processing. This was something he appreciated about her, she didn't perform her emotions. She had them, clearly, and they moved across her face honestly, but she didn't arrange them for an audience. "What does it mean?" she said. "The architecture being different." "I don't know yet," he said honestly. I think it means you can do things other people can't, but in a different way than the usual different. He paused. Have you ever done something that was too much? Not accidental magic exactly, but controlled magic that went further than you intended? She looked at the table. Every time, she said, quietly. Every single time. Right. So we should figure that out. He looked at his book. Can you do a core reach exercise? I can teach you the basic version. It'll help you calibrate. She looked at him. You're going to teach me something. If you want. Why? He thought about Minerva in the park, 8 weeks ago, saying because what you have is rare and wild and currently unsupervised. Because you're going to need the calibration, he said. This year specifically, and also generally. And because figuring it out on your own when someone who knows what they're looking at is available seems inefficient. Hermione Granger looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened her notebook and said, What do I do first? The Quidditch match was the 3rd Saturday of October, and Harry caught the snitch in 4 minutes and 38 seconds, which was apparently some kind of record. He knew it was some kind of record because every single Gryffindor in the vicinity told him so simultaneously, which was significantly louder than one person would have been. He'd felt the snitch before he'd seen it, a quick bright flutter of magical mechanism, slightly above and to his right, 50 yards out. He'd been tracking it for 90 seconds before he moved, waiting until the positioning was clean, and then he'd gone for it in a straight line at full speed and closed his fist around it while the Hufflepuff seeker was still looking at the wrong corner of the pitch. The roar from the Gryffindor stands was enormous and warm and briefly overwhelming, and he came out of it landing on the pitch grass holding the snitch aloft and feeling, for one clear moment, the specific animal joy of having moved perfectly, having read a situation and responded to it without hesitation, without second-guessing, just clean instinctive motion from decision to execution. He looked at the stands. Minerva was in the staff box. She was not cheering with the spectacular abandon of Professor Flitwick, who appeared to have fallen off his seat, or with Ron's kind of full-body seismic enthusiasm. She was sitting precisely upright, looking at him, and she had both hands pressed together in front of her lips. She looked exactly the way she had looked the morning he'd achieved his first full transformation. He raised the snitch in her direction, briefly, before the team reached him. Quirrell's robes caught fire at the Quidditch match. Not Harry's section of the stands, across the pitch, in the staff box, and it was out quickly, smothered and extinguished, and most of the crowd didn't notice because the match was already over. Harry noticed because he'd been watching the staff box, because he always watched Quirrell when they were in the same space, and he saw it happen, and he saw, in the moment before it was extinguished, something else. A brief darkening of Quirrell's shadow that was not consistent with the angle of the light. A tremor in the air around him that was not the fire. He told Hermione on the walk back to the castle. She had been doing the core reach exercises daily for 2 weeks, and she had taken to them the way she took to everything, with thorough precision, and then, once the precision was established, with an intuitive leap that seemed to be characteristic of her magic specifically. Her ability to feel magical events in her environment was developing faster than his had, which made sense given the nature of her core. I felt something during the match, she said. I didn't know what I was feeling. You saw it as visual. Visual, and he reached for the right language. Sensory. The wrong signature. The cold thing. It was in the box. Quirrell. He's carrying it, Harry said. Or it's carrying him. I've been trying to determine which is primary. He paused. I think he went somewhere on his sabbatical and he found something he wasn't equipped to handle, and now it's both of them in one body with him not entirely in charge. Hermione walked beside him and was quiet in the way she was quiet when she was doing several things simultaneously inside her head. If that's true, she said, then whatever's upstairs on the 3rd floor isn't just at risk from external threat. The threat is already inside the castle. Yes, Harry said. I know. Does Professor McGonagall know? She suspects. Dumbledore suspects too. But suspicion isn't proof and they can't act on it yet. He glanced at her. Which is why I've been paying the kind of attention I've been paying. You're building proof, she said. I'm building understanding, he corrected. Proof is for convincing other people. Understanding is for knowing what to do when something happens. She was quiet for a moment. You think something is going to happen? I think several somethings are going to happen, he said. I'd like to be ready for them. The thing about Hogwarts, Harry had decided by November, was that it was the first place he'd ever lived that felt like somewhere he was supposed to be. Not a novelty feeling. Not the wide-eyed wonder of first arrival, though he'd felt that too, the ceiling, the moving staircases, the portraits, all of it. Something more fundamental. The castle's magic recognized his, in the way places recognize people whose magic has been present in them for a long time. It shouldn't have been possible, for a first year whose family hadn't been in the castle for 10 years. But it was there. He mentioned it to Neville one evening, sitting by the Gryffindor common room fire. My Gran told me about that, Neville said, looking into the fire with the thoughtful quality he had when he was connecting something he'd known abstractly to something he'd just experienced. She said Hogwarts remembers everyone who was ever really themselves here. And that when you walk in as yourself, actually yourself, not performing anything, it recognizes you. He paused. I think I feel it too. I feel it in the grounds. Near the greenhouses. That suits you. You think so? Plants. Harry looked at him. You're better with the herbology practical than anyone in the year. You do it the same way you do the attunement, you listen to what something needs rather than just following the steps. Neville looked briefly startled, then quietly pleased in the specific way he got when something was true and he'd almost believed it before someone confirmed it. Professor Sprout said something similar. She said I had good hands for it. You do. The fire crackled. Ron was playing chess in the corner with a kind of ferocious concentration that turned out to be his dominant activity mode. Hermione was at the table with 4 books open and was, Harry suspected, not reading any of them but rather doing the version of the core-reach exercise she developed where she kept her eyes open and let her awareness of her environment expand in all directions simultaneously. Harry was watching the portrait over the fireplace, which was of a sleeping witch in an apple orchard, and thinking about the cold signature he'd felt in Quirrell at the Quidditch match, and about Neville's word, yourself, and about the way the castle's recognition felt like the park's recognition on the morning he'd stood in the long grass and smelled his father. He was exactly himself. He was that everywhere now, not just in the park and not just as the stag. He was himself in the Great Hall and in Transfiguration and on the Quidditch pitch and in the library with Hermione asking precise uncomfortable questions. He was himself in a way that was not performance and not effort. It had taken Minerva, and 8 weeks of early mornings, and a park in Surrey, and the smell of rain on wet grass, and his father's traces on the wind, and the moment a stag's antlers had materialized in a suburban garden on an overcast Wednesday in August. He was himself. And whatever was coming, the cold thing in Quirrell's shadow, the door on the 3rd floor, the signature on the wind that had followed him from Surrey to a castle in Scotland, whatever it intended, it was going to find that out. Chapter 5, The Mirror and the Predator. He'd been tracking Quirrell for 3 months. Not following him, he wasn't reckless, and he wasn't stupid, and surveillance that got noticed was worse than no surveillance at all. What he'd been doing was building a picture. Every time he was in the same space as Quirrell, he catalogued what he felt. Direction and intensity of the cold signature. Which way the man's attention moved. When the real Quirrell surfaced, the nervous, apologetic, slightly pathetic man who had apparently existed before the sabbatical, and when the thing underneath took over, which you could tell by the stillness, the way a pond goes still when something big comes up from the bottom. By December he had a map. Not a literal one, though he'd made notes. A map in the sense that he could feel the pattern, where Quirrell went at night, which corridors he favored, how often the cold signature strengthened or weakened and what those fluctuations corresponded to. The signature was stronger on nights when the temperature dropped, and stronger still on the nights when Harry felt, distantly, that something was moving in the upper floors of the castle. He'd told Minerva. He'd told her everything, systematically, the way she'd taught him to sort information, not all at once, not in dramatic revelations, but in regular debriefs where they compared what he'd felt against what she'd observed from her own angle. She had confirmed 2 of his conclusions and revised one of them and added 3 pieces of context he didn't have. Dumbledore, she told him, was aware that the situation was developing. He was also dealing with 17 other things simultaneously, because that was how Dumbledore existed, and the situation was being monitored. Harry's private view was that monitored was not the same as managed, and that the gap between those 2 words was where problems lived. He kept that view private. He didn't tell Hermione and Neville everything. He told them what they needed to know to stay safe and to be useful, which was a distinction he'd learned from observing Minerva's approach to information, not secrecy for its own sake, but the recognition that knowing more than you can act on creates anxiety without adding capability. What he'd given both of them instead was capability. Hermione's core calibration had progressed to a point where she could, as of 3 weeks ago, feel the presence of strong magic through walls, which she discovered by accident in the library when she'd felt Harry working on his Animagus control 2 floors above her and had come to find him with an expression that was equal parts excited and alarmed. She hadn't fully processed what this meant yet. Harry thought she would, and soon, and that when she did it was going to be extraordinary. Neville could now manage his magic with enough consistency that his grades had shifted from average to excellent in 6 weeks, which had startled his professors and not startled Harry at all. More importantly, under pressure, real pressure, not academic pressure, but the kind where something goes wrong fast, Neville's magic responded rather than misfired. Harry had been testing this quietly, creating small situations in which Neville had to react, and Neville had responded correctly every time. He had good people. He hadn't been trying to build a team and he'd built one anyway, which felt like something his mother would have done, if he understood her correctly. December came in hard, with frost on the castle stones by the 1st of the month and the lake going glassy and still. Most of the students went home for Christmas. Harry stayed, because Privet Drive was not somewhere he went back to unless he had to, and because something in the castle's rhythm changed during the holidays, the magic settled differently, the corridors thinned out, and the things that were present but usually camouflaged by the noise of several hundred students became more distinct. Neville stayed too. Gran's got her thing in London, he said, by way of explanation, and then didn't elaborate, and Harry didn't push. Ron stayed because his parents were in Romania visiting his brother Charlie, and Hermione went home but left behind a series of very organized notes and a brief letter that said, "I'll be back the 28th. Don't do anything interesting without telling me first." Harry wrote back, "No promises." The castle was quiet in a way he'd grown to appreciate. He ate at the small holiday table with Ron and Neville and a handful of other stay-behinds, and in the mornings he did his transformation practice in the west courtyard before breakfast, which was empty at 6 and usually stayed empty until 8. He was down to 5.1 seconds for the full transformation and he could hold the stag form for 47 minutes continuously, which was the current record in his personal log. He was working on partial transformations in specific and controlled ways, just the eyes for enhanced sight, just the nasal structure for improved smell without full transformation, which was advanced technique and occasionally uncomfortable and deeply useful. On Christmas morning he came down to a pile of presents he hadn't expected, because no one had given him presents before except Minerva, who had given him the notebook in August. He stood at the foot of the bed looking at them for a moment, just looking. From Minerva, a slim leather-bound journal, finer than the notebook, with a brief note inside the cover that said only for when the notebook runs out. From Neville and his grandmother, a book on advanced magical attunement and a tin of something called Honeyduke's Best that turned out to be extraordinarily good. From Ron, a small wizarding chess set because Ron had decided Harry needed to learn to play and was very sincere about this. From Hagrid, a box of hand-baked rock cakes that were structurally challenging but clearly made with total goodwill. From the Weasley family he'd never met, one of Mrs. Weasley's famous jumpers, deep green, with a small golden stag worked into the front that made him stop and look at it for a long moment. And one package he didn't recognize, wrapped in plain silver paper, no note. He picked it up and felt it carefully before opening it, magical object, old, significant, a complex layering of enchantments that were primarily passive rather than active. He opened it. A cloak. Silvery and fluid, pooling in his hands like liquid light, and the moment he touched it he could feel the enchantment, invisibility, but not ordinary charm work, something more fundamental, older, the kind of magical workmanship that didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. He held it for a moment. Then he put it on. The feeling of it was extraordinary, not just invisibility but a kind of magical neutrality, as if the thing around him was removing him from the world's awareness entirely, from magical perception as much as visual. His own senses registered a slight damping, everything going fractionally quieter, which told him that the cloak worked both ways to some extent, reducing what he emitted as well as what others could detect. He took it off and looked at it in his hands. Use it well, the theoretical note would have said, if there had been one. He folded it carefully and put it at the bottom of his trunk, wrapped inside the green jumper. He found the mirror on December the 27th, which was 2 days before Hermione came back, and entirely by accident, which was either good fortune or the particular kind of coincidence that wizarding history suggested was not always coincidental. He'd been following a different thread, a corridor he hadn't been in before, in the East Wing, that had given off a faint magical reading 3 nights running that he couldn't immediately classify. He'd been trying to do it quickly, before the castle fully woke up, and he'd taken a wrong turn, and the door at the end of the wrong turn corridor was slightly ajar and the magic coming through it was very strong and very specific. He pushed the door open and saw it. He'd read about the Mirror of Erised in Mrs. Figg's copy of Notable Magical Artifacts of the British Isles, Volume 3. He knew what it was before he saw the inscription, recognized it by the quality of its magic, deep, old, the particular resonance of something that had been performing the same function for centuries and had worn a groove in the magical landscape around it. The inscription ran backward across the top, Erised stra eru oit uber kafru oit onwosi. He translated it easily, I show not your face but your heart's desire. He stood in the doorway and looked at it. Then he walked in and stood in front of it. The figure in the mirror was his parents. He'd known that was the most probable outcome, he'd thought about what his heart's desire was, clinically, in the way he thought about everything, and it had seemed obvious. But knowing it was probable did not prepare him for the actual experience of it, which was something his analytical approach had no instrument for measuring. They were young. Younger than they'd been when they died, even, his mother looked maybe 20, with red hair and his eyes and a smile that was familiar in the specific way that things about yourself are familiar, and his father was taller than he'd imagined, with the untamable hair and glasses and the grinning, unconstrained delight of someone for whom the world was generally wonderful. They were standing together and they were looking at him, and in the mirror his own figure stood between them and all three of them were simply, together. He stood there and felt it. He felt the pull of it, the mirror's specific magic, which worked not through illusion but through genuine resonance, genuine contact with something real inside you. He felt the way it would be easy to stay here. He felt how someone could stand in front of this thing for days. He gave himself 60 seconds. At 58 seconds he said, quietly, to the figures in the glass, I know. He turned and walked out. Not because he didn't want what the mirror showed him. He wanted it so much it sat in his chest like a stone, specific and real and permanent. He walked out because staying was not the same as having, and because he'd learned over the last 4 months that he could carry grief and keep moving, that grief and capability were not mutually exclusive, and that his parents were most present to him not in front of a mirror in a cold empty room but in every morning he walked out of the castle and smelled the air and knew what was in it. In every moment his core hummed with the same instinct his father had carried. He was his parents' son. He carried them with him. The mirror was beautiful and sad and he was not going back. He was not the only person who had been in that room. He knew that 2 days later, when Hermione came back and found him in the library and sat down and said, something happened while I was gone. Tell me. I felt it from home, she said, and her voice had a quality he hadn't heard in it before, not quite frightened, more the specific alertness of someone whose internal alarm system has activated. On the 27th. A very strong magical event, directionally specific, northeast of London. I could feel the shape of it, not the details. Something opened. Or was opened. She looked at him. It was you. He looked at her. You found something, she said. Something significant. And you felt it very strongly and she paused. Your core is readable to me now. Whatever you were feeling, the intensity of it was detectable from 60 miles away. He thought about this. That's useful to know, he said. What was it? An artifact. The mirror of Erist. He watched her face. Have you read about it? It shows you your heart's desire. She was quiet for a moment. Are you all right? Yes. She looked at him steadily, the way she looked at things she was genuinely concerned about, without agenda, just direct attention. What did you see? My parents, he said, plainly. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm sorry. I'm all right, he said. I didn't stay. I know, she said. I felt when it stopped. She paused. That must have been, it was 60 seconds. That must have been very hard. Yes, he said. It was. They sat in the library and the castle was quiet around them, and he appreciated, very much, that she didn't say anything else about it and didn't look at him with the specific pitying look that adults got when they thought about his situation. She just sat there, being present, turning a page in her book without reading it, which was how she indicated she was available and not demanding. The cold signature was in the east wing last night, he said, after a while. Different corridor from the mirror, but same wing. She looked up. He's narrowing his search, Harry said. He's been working through the castle systematically, and I think he's going to find it soon. The thing on the 3rd floor. The dog. And whatever the dog is guarding. He looked at his hands. I think it's going to happen this year. Not because he's close to getting through the protections, but because whoever he's working through is getting desperate. The thing in Quirrell is using Quirrell up. I can feel the difference in the signature from September to now, and it's not sustainable. He paused. He'll move before the end of the year. What do we do? He had thought about this. He had been thinking about it for weeks, in the systematic way he thought about complex problems, not anxiously, not from a place of fear, but strategically, the way you plan a route when you know the terrain. We let him find it, he said. She looked at him. We let him get to the point where he thinks he's succeeding. Because as long as he thinks he's succeeding, he's predictable. The moment he realizes we know what he's doing, he changes his approach and we lose the map. He met her eyes. But we don't let him have it. There's a difference. You have a plan. I have the beginning of a plan. I need to talk to Professor McGonagall first. Minerva listened to all of it without interrupting, which was how he knew she was taking it seriously. She reserved her interruptions for things that were factually incorrect, and everything he was telling her was factually correct, and they both knew it. When he finished, she was quiet for approximately 10 seconds. Then she said, You want to use yourself as the conclusion. I want to be at the end of whatever gauntlet Dumbledore has set up, he said. Because Quirrell will go through it. And when he gets to the end, I want to be there. Dumbledore placed protections at the end of that corridor that are designed to stop an adult dark wizard. I know what's in there, Harry said. She looked at him sharply. I've been reading everything I could find about protection sequences, and you told me Dumbledore designed the outer layer, and I know your work, so I can reason about the shape of the interior. He paused. There's a logic puzzle at the end. Potions and a riddle. That's what the sequence leads to. She looked at him for a long moment. How did you? The cold signature on Tuesday night moved through the 3rd floor corridor and stopped at the dog's room. It stopped there. It couldn't get through. Which means whatever's past the dog stopped him, which means the protections are effective up to the point of entry. He paused. Once someone gets through the dog, they'll encounter whatever comes next in sequence. I've worked backward from what Dumbledore would design and forward from what I know is in there, and the end of the sequence is a logical puzzle that requires intelligence and a specific kind of thinking. Which Voldemort has, Minerva said. Which Quirrell has, and which I have, and which, when it matters, I'll be better at than either of them, because I won't be operating in a borrowed body that's deteriorating. She held his gaze. The fire in the grate was very bright. Outside the windows, Scotland in January was grey and cold and uncompromising. I want to call Dumbledore in, she said. Not yet, he said. Not until it's starting. If Dumbledore knows, he'll act, and if he acts before Quirrell moves, we lose the chance to finish this. He looked at her steadily. He's been managing this for 10 years and Voldemort is still here. I want to end it. Not manage it. She stared at him. I'm not being arrogant, he said. I'm being accurate. Voldemort is here, in the castle, in Quirrell, and he's going to go for what he wants before the end of the year, and the only way this resolves instead of perpetuating is if he walks into something definitive. He paused. I can be that. You're 11 years old. And I'm an Animagus who can read ward calibrations by smell, and I've been tracking this signature for 3 months and I know his patterns. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not the child he expects. That's the whole point. She was quiet for a very long time. The fire crackled. The clock on her mantelpiece ticked. You tell me, she said, finally, the moment it starts. The moment you feel the signature move through the 3rd floor. Not in the morning. Not at breakfast. The moment. Yes. And Dumbledore gets called immediately. Immediately, he agreed. I just need him to be too late to stop me going in. She gave him a look that could have stripped paint. That is not the agreement. No, he said. It is, though. She stared at him. He held her gaze. You are, she said, with a precision that suggested she was choosing the word carefully, exactly like your father in the worst possible way. Also the best possible way, he said. Don't push it. It happened on a Tuesday in early spring, which he'd always thought would be an interesting detail in retrospect, the particular mundanity of a Tuesday. He'd been in Transfiguration, their double lesson, which he'd come to love, not because it was easy but because the intellectual architecture of it engaged the same part of his brain that the Animagus work did, the part that understood magic as a relationship between intent and form rather than a mechanical process. He was in the middle of a conversation with Minerva about the theory of partial form transfiguration, which was not technically on the first-year curriculum but which they'd been discussing in the space between her teaching the class and him finishing assignments in approximately a quarter of the allotted time, when it hit him. The cold signature. Not in the East Wing. Not in the usual corridors. Above them, above and moving fast, with a focus and intensity and directionality that was completely different from the probing reconnaissance he'd been tracking for months. He was on his feet before he'd consciously decided to move. Minerva looked at him. Now, he said. Her face didn't change. She turned to the class with complete composure and said, continue your work. I need a moment, and was out the door behind him in 3 seconds. In the corridor she grabbed his arm and said, very quietly, I'm calling Dumbledore. I know. He was already moving. There's a head start in this for me and I'm taking it. Harry, I'll be careful, he said. And then, because she deserved more than careful, I know what I'm doing. I've known what I'm doing for months. Trust that. She looked at him for one long, fractured moment. Something moved in her face that was not fear exactly but was in the same family, the look of someone who has prepared someone for something and is now watching them go toward it and feeling every seam of the preparation. Go, she said. And I am right behind you. He ran. The dog was unconscious. Quirrell was thorough. Whatever he'd used on the 3-headed beast had worked completely, the massive body sprawled across the trapdoor with the slow breath of deep sleep. Harry didn't feel bad about going past it, because Quirrell had done the work and Harry had the benefit of his preparation, which felt appropriate somehow. He dropped through the trapdoor. Devil's snare caught him and began to coil immediately, the vines wrapping his arms and legs with the patient insistence of something that did this automatically and didn't understand resistance. He went still. Devil's snare tightened on stillness too, and he'd read enough herbology to know that the particular species, which he'd identified by the smell of it before he landed, the distinctive cool dark fungal green scent, responded to light and heat. He transformed. Not fully. Just the core temperature shift. His Animagus form ran several degrees warmer than his human form, particularly in the torso, because a stag's resting body temperature was higher. He pushed that outward, a controlled radiant warmth, and the devil's snare released instantly, recoiling from the heat, and he was through. The flying keys were bright and loud in the cold room, hundreds of them wheeling in the dark, and the brooms were racked against the wall. He'd been here in his imagination 100 times, running the scenario, working through the logic. The oldest key, the most battered, the one that had been used most. He took the broom, went up, and within 40 seconds he had the key. The chess room hit him like a wall, not physically, but magically, the scale of the enchantment enormous, the pieces standing twice his height and radiating old magic. Ron had taught him chess. He'd played it every day for 3 months with the furious concentration Ron brought to everything chess-related, and he was good at it, not Ron good but good enough, and more importantly he understood the underlying logic of it. He didn't play it. He looked at the board for 30 seconds and then did something that Minerva had done once, looking at a problem he'd been overthinking, and knocked over his own king. The board reset. The pieces stood aside. "You can't do that," said a voice from nowhere, some enchantment's protest mechanism. "I just did," he said, and walked through. The troll was unconscious already, Quirrell's work again, and Harry was glad he didn't have to deal with it, because the smell in the room was extraordinary and not in any good way. The potion room. He felt Quirrell through the wall before he opened the door, the cold signature, strong now, overwhelming, the thing barely contained in Quirrell's body and barely trying to contain itself. He stood in the doorway and looked at the 7 bottles in their row and the fire barriers, and he read the riddle without touching anything, turning the logic over cleanly. He solved it in 90 seconds. Drank the right bottle. Walked through the black fire. Quirrell was standing at the mirror of Eriste. That was the thing Harry had known and that Voldemort hadn't. The mirror wasn't just an artifact of desire, it wasn't just a thing that showed you what you wanted. Dumbledore had placed it here for a reason, had made it the final key, and Harry had reasoned through that reason in the quiet of January and arrived at the correct answer. The only way to get what was inside it was to want to find it, not to use it. And Voldemort couldn't want to find it without wanting to use it. The logic was airtight and elegant and exactly what Dumbledore would design. Quirrell turned at the sound of his entry. His eyes were different from the hallway, from the Great Hall, from all the careful monitoring Harry had done from a safe distance. Up close, in this room, the thing that was looking out of Quirrell's face was Voldemort, undisguised, not bothering with the nervous professor performance, and it was looking at Harry with an attention that was nothing like a human's attention. "Harry Potter," it said, through Quirrell's mouth, and Quirrell's voice was different, richer, cooler, something underneath it that resonated wrong. "Yes," Harry said. He walked into the room. He didn't walk in cautiously, didn't press himself against the wall or keep the door at his back. He walked in the way he walked into the park at dawn, with purpose, measuring the space, reading the magical geometry of the room, noting the mirror's position and the distance to Quirrell and the 3 exits and the temperature differential that told him the mirror was active, was showing something. Quirrell watched him move and something in his expression, something that was Voldemort's expression, shifted. "You're not afraid," it said. "No," Harry said. "Every person who has encountered me, I know what you've done," Harry said. "I know what you are. I've been tracking your signature since August." He stopped 12 feet from Quirrell and met the eyes, Quirrell's eyes, but the gaze behind them completely alien, flat and ancient and very intelligent. "And I know you've been tracking me since before that. So let's not do the part where we pretend I'm a surprise." A pause. Something moved in the flat intelligent gaze, not surprise, exactly, but the recalibration of a predator that has just received unexpected information about its prey. The girl, Quirrell said slowly, told me a boy with the right core signature had been developing. She was wrong about what stage. There is no girl, Harry said. You've been working with imperfect intelligence. Quirrell had contacts, Quirrell's contacts saw what Quirrell saw. Quirrell saw a first-year student at flying lessons and Quidditch practice. Harry looked at him steadily. You've been watching the surface. I've been watching underneath. Quirrell's face did something complicated. Then it smiled, and it was Voldemort's smile, and it was genuinely admiring in the way that predators are admiring of something that successfully complicates their hunt. The mirror, it said. You know how it works. Dumbledore designed it well. The stone comes to the person who wants to find it and not use it. He glanced at the mirror's surface, he could see himself in it, just himself, no stone, no glowing addition, because he hadn't stepped in front of it properly yet. Which is your problem? Not mine. And you believe you can simply take it. I believe Dumbledore designed a system that works exactly as intended. He looked back at Quirrell. The question isn't whether I can take it. The question is whether you're going to let me walk to the mirror. Quirrell moved. Not Quirrell, Voldemort, moving Quirrell's body, and moving it fast, with the efficiency of someone who has occupied physical forms for long enough to know how to use them precisely. Harry was already moving. He didn't transform fully. He took the stag's speed and the stag's turning reflexes and kept his human form, because the room was too tight for a full stag and he needed hands, and the partial overlay, just the legs, just the lower body, the powerful haunches of the deer driving him sideways and forward, meant he moved at angles that Quirrell's reach didn't anticipate. He got to the mirror. He stood in front of it. He looked. In the glass, his father was there, and his mother was there, and they were both looking at him with the specific expression that parents have when they watch their children do something difficult, proud, afraid, wanting to step in, knowing they can't. His father's hand was on his shoulder in the mirror, and the weight of it was completely imaginary and completely real. His mother had both her hands pressed together in front of her lips, exactly the way Minerva had looked from the staff box when he caught the snitch. And in the mirror's version of his hand, there was a small red stone. He felt it materialize in his actual pocket simultaneously, the warmth of it, the specific dense magical hum of something enormously powerful contained in an extremely small space. He closed his fingers around it through the fabric of his robe. He turned around. Quirrell was behind him. Too close, 8 feet, closing. The spell that fired from Quirrell's wand was not a color Harry recognized, which meant it was something outside the first-year curriculum, which meant it was something designed to hurt or contain or end. He dropped, the stag's reflex again, dropping to a crouch faster than human reflexes alone would have managed, and felt the spell pass through the air where he'd been standing. You are 11 years old, Quirrell said, and Voldemort's frustration was audible through the voice now, a cold compressed fury. You cannot, I'm not fighting you, Harry said, from the floor, moving laterally. You need to touch me to take the stone. You know that. Dumbledore designed this too. Quirrell stopped. You've been trying to kill me since I was 15 months old, Harry said. And every time, something gets in the way. He rose from his crouch, unhurried, watching Quirrell's hands. I used to think that was luck. I don't think it's luck anymore. Your mother's, her sacrifice. I know. It's in my blood, you can't touch me without it hurting you. He looked at Quirrell steadily. But that's not why I said it. I said it because you keep expecting me to be a specific thing and I keep being something different. You're still running the calculation from 1981. He paused. I'm not that baby. Something in the flat intelligent gaze narrowed. Try to take it, Harry said, quietly. Not an invitation. Not bravado. Just, stating what was about to happen, accurately, so there were no surprises. Quirrell crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed Harry's arm. The reaction was immediate and total. Voldemort screamed, a sound that had no relationship to Quirrell's voice, something from underneath it, raw and ancient and in pain, and Quirrell's hands where they gripped Harry's arm began to dissolve. Not metaphorically. The skin went wrong, turning gray, going to ash, and Quirrell fell back making a sound that was both of them at once, the professor and the thing inside him both expressing the same agony on different frequencies. Harry stepped back. Quirrell fell to the floor. Harry crouched beside him, not touching, and looked at the face, Quirrell's face, fully Quirrell now, the possession breaking down under whatever was happening to the body, the man's own eyes surfacing with the confused terror of someone who has been a passenger in himself for almost a year and has just been returned to the driver's seat in a burning vehicle. "I'm sorry," Harry said. He meant it. Quirrell's mouth moved. Whatever he was trying to say didn't come out. His eyes unfocused. Above the ruined body, the air moved. Harry felt it before he saw it, the cold signature, entirely free of Quirrell now, present in the room as a raw thing, unhoused, and the quality of it was nothing like it had been in Surrey, nothing like the passing shadow on the wind. This was Voldemort with nothing between him and the world, reduced and furious and old, and it swept toward Harry like a cold front. Harry stood up. He reached for his core. He did not transform. He held the stag fully present in his sternum and let the warmth of it radiate outward, the deep animal warmth of something rooted and alive and absolutely certain of its own existence, and he pushed it against the cold thing the way you push light into a dark room, not fighting, just being irreducibly alive in the face of something that wanted to unmake him. The cold thing screamed again. It moved past him. It was gone. The room was empty. The mirror stood impassive. Quirrell lay still. Harry stood in a silence and breathed. He woke up in the hospital wing. Not dramatically, not with a gasp, not sitting bolt upright. He just opened his eyes and the stone ceiling of the hospital wing was above him and everything hurt in the specific diffuse way that things hurt when your body has done something large and your brain hasn't caught up with the assessment yet. "You're awake," said Hermione, from the chair beside his bed. He turned his head. She was there with Neville beside her and both of them looked like they hadn't slept in a significant number of hours, which he registered with a specific kind of warmth that he filed away to think about later. "How long?" he said. 2 days, Neville said. "It's Thursday." He absorbed this. Quirrell. A pause. "He didn't make it," Hermione said, carefully. He looked at the ceiling. He had known that was the likely outcome, had known it from the moment he'd seen the body going grey under his hands, and knowing it didn't make it better. Quirrell had made choices that had brought him to that room, but the thing that had consumed him had been Voldemort's doing, and Harry made himself keep that distinction clear. "And Voldemort?" "Gone," said a different voice. He turned. Dumbledore was sitting in the chair on the other side of the bed, which meant he'd been there for a while and had been quiet, which was either respectful or strategic and was probably both. He looked, and Harry was trying to see him clearly, the way he'd been told to see things, not through the refraction of legend and reputation but directly. He looked tired. Not physically tired. The other kind. "He survived," Dumbledore said. "Fled the host body. He is, out there, somewhere, less than he was. Which is considerably less than he would have been had you not stopped him." His blue eyes held Harry's steadily. "The stone is destroyed." "Good," Harry said. The Flammels were informed and were, at peace with the decision. Nicholas has said several times that they had had a good, long enough life. He paused. "This was my decision, and the right one, though I wish it had not required a child to be the instrument of it." "I wasn't an instrument," Harry said, not harshly, just accurately. "No," Dumbledore said, and his voice had the quality Minerva had described, the quality of being told something true about yourself and sitting with it. "You weren't. You were a person making a choice." He paused. "A well-prepared one. Where is Professor McGonagall?" She was here until an hour ago. She will be deeply put out that you woke up without her. A beat. She spent the last 2 days being extremely controlled about how worried she was, which anyone who knows her will recognize as the most intense form of concern available to her. Harry looked at the window. The spring light was clear and clean, and outside he could hear something distant, birds, the faint far sound of students on the grounds. The castle sounded like itself. "There's something you want to tell me," Harry said, without looking back at Dumbledore. A silence. "Several things," Dumbledore said. "About the stone. About Voldemort. About what I am and what you think I'm for." Harry turned to look at him directly. "You can tell me. I'd prefer you tell me straight." Something moved in Dumbledore's expression. He leaned forward slightly, and his voice when he spoke was very different from the performance of Dumbledore, warmer, less constructed, the voice of someone talking to another person rather than managing a situation. "There is a prophecy," he said. "About you and Voldemort. I have been carrying it for 10 years and making decisions around it that I believed were protective and that, I am beginning to understand, were not entirely mine to make." "Tell me." Dumbledore told him. Harry listened. He asked 2 questions and let the silence after the prophecy sit before doing anything with it. Neville and Hermione were both very still on the other side of the bed. When it was done he said, "Neither can live while the other survives. That is the relevant portion, yes. And you've known this since before I was born. Before you were born. And you left me with the Dursleys and watched and waited." "Yes," Dumbledore said, and there was nothing in his voice that was defensive. Just the word, and its full weight. "Yes. I did." Harry held his gaze. He could see the man clearly, the brilliant, complicated, genuinely caring man who had nonetheless taken a child and wrapped him in a narrative without his knowledge or consent, who had done enormous good and made enormous mistakes with equal conviction. He could see all of it. "I don't hate you for it," Harry said. "I'm not sure you should forgive me for it either. I'm not forgiving you. I'm telling you how it is." He looked at the window again, at the light. "And I'm telling you that from here on, the decisions about my life are mine. Not yours and not anyone else's. You can advise. You can help. You can be, whatever this is." He gestured briefly between them. "But you don't move the piece without asking the piece." Another silence. "Agreed," Dumbledore said. Very quietly. Very completely. Minerva appeared at 4 o'clock. She didn't say anything immediately. She came in, looked at him, looked at his chart, looked at Hermione and Neville in a way that told them both she knew they'd been there the whole time and approved without needing to say so. Then she sat in the chair Dumbledore had vacated and looked at him. "You were 17 seconds ahead of me," she said. "That's how long before I got through the trapdoor. 17 seconds. I know. I found you on the floor of the potions room. I know. You were," she stopped. "Unconscious." The residual of whatever confrontation had occurred in the mirror room was, she stopped again, and he realized she was doing what she did when she was managing something she had decided to manage rather than display. "You were alive," she said. "That is the relevant fact." "I was going to be alive," he said. "I knew what I was doing." "I am aware you knew what you were doing," she said. "I am also aware that knowing what you're doing and surviving it are not always the same outcome, and that for 17 seconds I was discovering that differential personally." He looked at her. He'd never heard her talk quite like that, not out of composure, not distressed, but somewhere adjacent to it that was specifically about him. "I'm sorry about the 17 seconds, he said. "Don't be sorry about the 17 seconds. She reached into her robes and produced the green leather journal she'd given him at Christmas. It had somehow made it here, which meant someone had retrieved it from Gryffindor Tower. "You left this on your desk. I thought you might want it." He took it. It was warm from her robes. "The stone?" she said. Destroyed. And Voldemort? Gone. Not dead. Gone. He paused. He'll come back. I don't know how or when, but the prophecy means he will. I know. She looked at him. And when he does, you will be more prepared than you are now. As will I. She paused. As will the people sitting on the other side of your bed who have not slept since Tuesday. Hermione made a small undignified sound. Neville said, we slept. A little. Hermione read 4 books, Neville added. One of them twice, Hermione said. Harry looked at them. He looked at Minerva. He looked at the spring light on the wall and the journal in his hands and thought about a garden wall in Surrey and a cat blinking at him with deliberate intent and a morning in August when the world had broken open into something new. I want to go outside, he said. You've been unconscious for 2 days, Minerva said. I know. I still want to go outside. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stood up and said, 5 minutes. Grounds only. Do not transform, and held the door. He swung his legs off the bed. Hermione and Neville stood. The 4 of them walked out of the hospital wing together, into the corridor, toward the light at the end of it. The grounds were green and cold and the lake was silver in the afternoon light, and the air smelled of Scotland, grass and stone and water and the faint coming warmth of spring still deciding whether to arrive. He breathed in, felt the castle's familiar hum, felt the grounds around them with the ambient half-attention that was just how he existed now. He felt Neville's deep earth-press magic settling beside him like a root finding soil. He felt Hermione's vast carefully calibrated core, too big for what anyone expected, absolutely certain of itself now in a way it hadn't been in September. He felt Minerva, steady and warm and familiar as the stone itself. He felt his own core, the stag heat of it, rooted and kinetic and entirely his. No cold signature. No wrong smell on the wind. Just Scotland in April and 3 friends and the person who had found him on a garden wall when he was 10 years old and decided to see him. Right, he said. Right, said Neville. Next year, Hermione said, we're doing this more organized. I'm making a schedule. You can try, Harry said. I will definitely succeed, she said. He turned to look at the castle, all of it, the towers and the battlements and the ancient patient magic of it, and felt completely, specifically, irreducibly himself. Whatever was coming, he was ready for it. That evening, when Hermione and Neville had gone to dinner and the grounds were emptying out, he sat on the steps outside the hospital wing and opened the green journal. He wrote, Year 1. Voldemort, not finished. Quirrell, gone. Stone, destroyed. Prophecy, known. He paused. Then he wrote, McGonagall was 17 seconds behind me. Next time, make it 18. He thought about it. Then he wrote, Dad ran in this park in the mornings before the street woke up. I can still smell it. I think that's the closest I'll get for a while, and I think that's enough for now. I think he'd say the same. He closed the journal. The evening was very still and the stars were coming out over Scotland one by one, and somewhere in the castle behind him something ancient and enormous was doing what it had always done, holding fast, holding everyone inside it, waiting to see what they'd become. He was becoming it faster than anyone had expected. That was fine. That was, in fact, exactly right.